Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming back. Hopefully we don't have you here a whole lot more. Feeling very optimistic. As you've seen, 12 of the 13 bills moving. We've avoided having to get in any situation around our transportation projects. That's exciting. Conversations are still happening. I think things are starting to, as I said, the plane is going to land. It may have lost a rudder or two and a little shaky, but it will land, and that's what Minnesotans should expect. And I think that coming on the heels of potential compromise on a federal infrastructure package is really good news for Minnesota on a lot of fronts. And then, of course, along with the rest of Minnesotans and the rest of the world, we're watching the sentencing of Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd. Waiting to see. I trust our justice system. Justice they'll make their statement, and then that's one step, I think, towards trying to get some of the accountability and some of the healing that Minnesotans are desperate for. So it looks like things are moving where they should. We've got this a little bit too close, but it's my expectation that it sounds like sometime either later today or tomorrow we should be able to get pretty close to wrapping this thing all up. So glad to answer some.
Is Derek Chauvin sentencing, in your view, an example of why police reform agreement needs to be reached?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think what it is, and I'll go back to this, Tom, the complexity of this, of both public safety issues, policing, changes in policing in communities, and then the belief that large numbers of folks in our community don't feel like they can trust the folks that are there to protect them. This one brings that sense of, this can work. But I would go back again. It really struck me the day the verdict was coming out that, to be very candid, most white Minnesotans expected the verdict to be guilty. Most black Minnesotans did not. And that, I think, seeing that today and seeing a sentencing, that it feels like there's an accountability. And there's no joy in this. There's a man dead. There's a family destroyed, several families destroyed. But that's the way the system works. So I think it highlights that this can work. I do think it shows that there are things that we can do together to ensure that we're never in this situation again. That's one of those situations that if we can avoid that violence, that's what we're looking for.
So just to be clear, public safety could come together again today?
I think so. I don't want to speak. I know that the House and Senate are working closely. I don't want to step in when those conferees are still working. But both sides, I think, last night, the way I heard from both sides, that it was there's a lot of times you hear this is the final offer, but you start to know when it is the final offer. It looks like they're coming together. There's been some compromise taken on both sides, and I do think they can get it.
Given the potential for this deal over the next couple of days, what has been your conversation with the DOC Commissioner about planning for no budget next Wednesday at the prison?
Yeah, it was just to see. We have it on numerous different things, whether it was COVID contingencies, all kinds of things that could happen. It was just to be prepared on what this looked like. I don't think that expectation was ever very high, but I do think you have a responsibility to be prepared for it. Just making sure that operations continue to run smoothly, that safety both of the public and to those folks that we have a responsibility for who are incarcerated, and I felt confident that they were there. They would have the staffing. They'd be able to do what they need to do. But again, I'm feeling very confident. The way I understand it, we should be seeing state government bill go forward here in the very near future, and those things will help us fund those very essential services.
So with or without the authority, you would keep the prisons open?
Well, after I talked to you last time, my lawyers who are smarter than me said, be very careful about what you talk about. We can do that because the court case is still pending. What I can tell Minnesotans, and I feel very confident, and it's my responsibility to do so, is we'll keep folks safe, and I will make the decisions based on what's safe, and we'll look afterwards. My message the whole time is that is absolutely not necessary. There would be no reason we would ever go there, and now as I stand here today, I'm absolutely certain they're going to finish this thing and we'll put it to bed.
How do you maintain momentum for the police reform? You've got a guilty verdict on Chauvin. The sentence is going to be pretty harsh, you figure. Isn't that kind of a way for folks to say, well, the system did work, we don't need to do more?
Well, I think some say that, but I would argue that many wouldn't. We still have several trials yet to go on George Floyd's death. We have Dante Wright. We have folks that are concerned on what happened with the federal task force with Winston Smith. new videos surfacing today. There's still a lot of things out there where people are looking at that. And I think the thing that needs to be said in this is an opportunity for some real good collaboration. A lot of these things that are being proposed are accepted by the police. No one's asking to put the police in a position where they can't do their job. They're asking them, though, what does that job look like in the modern world? Some of these things, Travis's law or whatever, I mean, I've talked to too many parents that they knew their child had mental health challenges. It was a situation where they needed some help, so they called 911, and instead of getting the mental health help, they got a situation that escalated into violence and had a dead child. The parents didn't want that, the police didn't want it, we don't want it, and I think that momentum seems to still be there for that. But there are people who would say, well, this is justice and it's over.
And will there be the same kind of commitment to ending the retaliatory crime, urban?
Has to be.
What's the solution there?
Well, I don't think, yeah, and I said yesterday when I asked, I said every mayor in the country would like me to tell them that, but I just have to be candid with you. I just left a very difficult meeting this morning. I don't think anything happens by chance. I started the morning meeting with James Meredith and talking about that integration at the University of Mississippi, and less than 5 minutes ago, I just had a lunch with K.G. Wilson, grandfather of Anaya Allen, 6-year-old who was shot, and his heart is broken. And he's asking us, and I am. I think the solution to this, while it is complex and not oversimplify, one of the things is the alignment of all these different agencies and all of the different potential of folks who can help on this. You're not just going to do it just by police alone and expect them to try and solve it. You're not going to do it even when you increase, if that's the need at some places. You're going to have both the intelligence of who's doing this, you're going to have the interveners on the streets, you're going to have schools and counselors and businesses involved with this. But I think that commitment is there. We're seeing this across the country. There's numerous reasons. There's a lot of guns out there, and I don't have the research to back this, but I'm feeling it when I look at this 6 months has had more complaints of violence on aircraft than any time in our entire aviation history. It feels to me like there's a bit of a meanness out there, whether that's a result of coming out of COVID or whether it's the rhetoric you see in politics. Whatever's doing it, there's something different happening. And prior to last year, across the country, violent crimes and crime in general was at a 50-year low. The state of Minnesota was the 3rd safest state in the nation. So I don't know if I necessarily have the answer, but I do know the answer is out there, and almost all in these situations, one of the keys to that is broad-based collaboration in the community. That's where I think we're missing an opportunity right now to talk about both this increased violence that's out there, guns, all of that, and police accountability, and the need to have a security apparatus in our communities that fits that community's needs. So we'll see today. I think what comes out of this verdict and what comes out of one budget at one point in time, that I still think that is not going to change the momentum to try and get there to get real solutions.
Governor, you said that yesterday that things are still stuck, and you mentioned what public safety, what is the kind of sticking points that Republicans are still a little reticent to get on board. It seems like that's the same things you've been stuck on for months now. So I'm wondering, how are you bringing Republicans on board to your proposals if, again, these are the things since day one of the session that they've been non-starters or things that they're really reluctant to do. So how do you make progress, especially now in the final days here?
No, I think, and speaking to the humanity, I think one of the untold stories here is there has been movement out of Senate Republicans, and I've been careful. I've criticized them at times, and I have publicly criticized Senator Limmer about guns, and I'm trying to rethink, how we do some of that rhetoric amongst us, but Senator Limmer has been there, and he and I have called him, and we've had conversations. I think things like the no-knock warrants, and some of it's the language. Just to be very candid, some of the talk is, how long is the period when you're expecting body camera footage to be released? How long would that be? The families want it as soon as they can. The police, and this is not a position because they don't want the truth to come out, they're concerned that it can impact the investigation if it comes out too soon. And I think it's working on that language where I don't think we're as different as it appears in the beginning. There are some things that I don't think are going to get done. And I think maybe the qualified immunity piece, it appears like that is absolutely, but I can tell you this, things that maybe have been opposed up publicly, a start position, both sides have tried to move those, and they're further along, because I'm seeing language being exchanged that is now talking about how long would that body camera footage be. And of course, House proposals are much shorter time, Senate's much longer time, but they still in agreement that body cam footage getting to families and getting out there is a helpful means. We've seen this. We've seen this, the situation last summer where we had the unfortunate murder-suicide that for a short time looked like it was going to re-spark some civil unrest. The minute that got out there and a press conference was done, people said, oh, well, now we understood what happened. It's about rebuilding trust, so I'm still hopeful.
Governor, as bills arrive on your desk, logistically, mechanically, how are you going to deal with this? Do they have to be passed, they get signed, and then they have to be all signed by June 30th? Or
yes, yeah, by midnight they do. And I have 3 days to sign these before they come to me. Obviously, we're going to take a lot less time. We have asked and said, it looks like there's a little bit of foot dragging. I will say this, both the Speaker and the Majority Leader have both asked their people to speed up, and that did happen. My team, after the revisers get them, the Senate team, the House team, the nonpartisan team, and then our team, making sure there's no errors in here, inadvertent errors. And I trust that goodwill is being done. But many of you who are veterans of this place know that there has been mischief at times in bills and just overlooking, and we're making sure that. So we're hurrying. It's my intention to have them all signed with plenty of time before that. The good news is, those, especially these very disruptive bills like transportation, having that over signed and done takes that part of it out, but we need the whole package.
There are other bills that don't fit into these omnibus bills that are still out
Yeah.
there and still need to be passed. One of them is we hear that there still could be some arrangement to have the legislature have an emergency, state of emergency, and not you. Can you talk about where that is?
Yeah, and yeah, in this issue, and I think it's good timing. Right now I got my brief this morning. If things go as they are right now on vaccinations, sometime next Friday afternoon we'll hit the 70% mark. That has been pushed back, and they can almost take it down to the hours. So we're in a great spot on that. At the end of the month, many of the other emergency powers that were in place will expire, and it was always our intention that we had the handle on this. We had the long-term ability to be able to manage COVID. We're going to need boosters. We're going to need some of that. July 1st, we start demobilizing the state testing sites and some of the state vaccine sites, because we have 7,000 other sites that are now embedded into the community. I'll start packing up the warehouse. We'll set a permanent state strategic stockpile. We'll be moving to a new location, so we'll have that, God help us if we needed it again. We'll be stepping back off of the unemployment insurance folks over there who were doing some things to speed those checks that got out. And it's always been our intention, and I think to let them know is that we'll end the emergency powers on the 1st of August, that's when the toolbox will close. Everything will be done. It'll be done in an orderly fashion. Basically at this point in time, it's turning off the lights and sweeping the floor. But I have to redeploy about 500 state employees back to their jobs where they would go. So there's just some of those maintenance things, but it has always been our intention, and we've been saying, and I want to thank the legislature. The eviction moratorium move was absolutely critical, gives us great certainty there, and so I hope that they take some of those things up. We welcome, we've seen some language that does exactly this. I welcome them to do that. I think that's the right thing to do, and then we close the toolbox, if you will.
Has that been agreed to with the legislators, Senator Gazelka, or is this just your plan?
I told them, I said that's where we're at. I can't negotiate on public safety, and again, one of the big things is we get to the 500,000 Minnesotans have relied on the expanded SNAP benefits during this time. We closed this thing off on the 1st of August, and we're able to receive about $90 million in federal assistance to the end of the fiscal year, which the federal fiscal year is the end of October. We get through August and September. So we talked to them about that. We showed them how this could be done. We showed them where we were closing. And many of you have seen this. This has been kind of that slow roll we talked about of pulling things off. Kind of the big holdup was the eviction moratorium. That's off the table. This is just the responsible way to close this up. I believe 36 or 37 states are still in the state of emergency and will be. Texas re-upped theirs last month. So Minnesota will actually be one of the first states I think certainly with divided government, no less, that'll be closing these things up. So we talked to him about him, showed him that, and said, if you want to codify that, go right ahead. Meaning that it's not just the governor saying he's going to do this, it's in law that the 1st of August is when this thing buttons up. And that's now 34 days away, and I can't tell you that the Republican legislators may tell you they're super happy about that. I'll guarantee you I'm happier than they are that we're starting to get there.
So is it July 31st or August, would it be on midnight August 1st? Or
It's midnight on August 1st because you have to have one full day in August to get August and September. And so it will kick off at 12:01 officially, 12:01 a.m. on the 2nd of August. So
Yeah, what's been in the cold with refinery workers this winter?
Yeah.
There's a chance refinery safety may be added back into the House jobs bill, and then they'll be pressuring the Senate to re-adopt the amendment.
yeah. Well, I feel strongly about this bill. I don't think that's a surprise to any of you. We tried to work out a compromise. These are the things where you have to trust one another, where you ask certain things. There's certain things in here I said, okay, this is the last time I'm going to ask you, are you willing to do this? And in this case, the Senate said, no, we're not willing to do it. Now, though, it's back in the hands of the legislators, and they're doing some legislative maneuvering or where it could be. I certainly would love to see it in there. I would certainly sign it, but I don't think I've not seen a change of heart that we've asked about that and what, and this was one of those things about what can we do to help you? Are there things that we can add in here? This was one of those things where they said, no, there's nothing that you can add in. We just are opposed to it.
Just to clarify on the emergency, will you need to seek an extension, or will this cover?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. The question I think this was about a month ago I said, it's a really good question because I said, I thought July would be the last time we'd have a special session on this. We will have to have that come back to close out those last 15 days just because we fall in the middle of the month. And this is, again, the interpretation that we did when we started this. I think it was the deferment to the legislature to come back every 30 days. In retrospect, we might want to think about that, but I do think it was the best way to do it because it kept what I think could be a healthy dynamic in the mix. So we do have to come back on the 15th, but it will simply be by that point in time to extend it on. There'll be, I think, probably the 15th of July or somewhere, maybe a little bit earlier than that. We'll have transitioned back to the regular UI system, and I don't think there will be anything left except the SNAP.
But to clarify, go ahead.
Yep.
I was just going to say, so you'll have to call the legislature back the 15th of July.
Yeah.
If that's true, the legislature put off a lot of things with the
Amen.
special session in mind. If there's still things unstuck, do you
I think it's
and fund the policy until July?
I don't think that, but I do think there's a really important thing that we do need to get done as quickly as possible. We need to appoint that board for those frontline workers who are going to take part in that $250 million. That's 3 from the administration, 3 from the House, and 3 from the Senate. That seems to me that maybe some of that work could be done, but I don't think that, and I've made it very clear, we don't need to push past the 1st of July to have this fight on July 15th. This is the deadline. The deadline is upon us this week. We've got 12 of 13 done. We're coming to some conclusions. We've worked out some of our biggest policy differences, and the toolbox on the emergency powers closes. And then we have long-term, and this is where I think the legislature, having that pot of money that we have, we will start to plan accordingly for booster shots, PPE, potential for testing and contact tracing. Again, I want to try and encourage everybody. I know they're sick of hearing about it, both from the vaccine of get it done, but the testing piece is still really, really important. And we'll use that very strategically, I think, especially in our schools next fall, to be able to pinpoint very quickly.
Governor, to clarify, I understood that they could draft a bill on the emergency powers in such a way.
They could.
That not have
They could. They could. And I don't know, I'm sorry if I misunderstood that piece or we came together. If the legislature drafts this and we're done on the 1st of August, they can draft it that we don't need to come back. It's just done. I would encourage them to do that. I think that's the best way to do it. If they do not do that, and if nothing gets decided, we'll come back on the 15th. But our team is incredibly comfortable. The plans that we've worked out when I've asked them to look at where we're at, everything from PPE to redeploying state employees to that SNAP benefit or whatever, what is the logical, smart, and best way for us to, and quickest way for us to wrap this up. And August 1st is that date. So I think for Minnesotans to know is we'll close the toolbox, and the peacetime emergency around COVID will be done. And I think we do this right. We manage whatever manifests next fall, whether it's a Delta or a Delta Plus variant. We should be able to handle that in the normal manner. We're going to start right now contracting through the normal manner, because there's no need for expedited contracting as we think about fall in schools. So we'll just start doing those through the normal process. They may take 30 or 60 days, but we have time now, and that's the way this was always meant to get to. So, yeah, go. I think it's fantastic, and I'm going to give great credit here. This is a huge piece of what we do. It impacts millions of Minnesotans' lives, and there are passionate advocates in this. And this is one of those bills. This was done between Commissioner Harpstead and some of the others as they intersected, Chair Liebling, and Senator Benson. And I have got to give incredible thanks and kudos to three incredibly talented leaders who know this issue better than anybody in the state, in my opinion, and they're also, in many cases, about as polarized politically as you could possibly get, and yet they worked out, when we start to pull this thing apart, an incredible bill for Minnesotans, while delivering services, especially to the most vulnerable, and being innovative. They did so in a fiscally responsible manner. So I have to say, the HHS bill, with all the talk about public safety, one of the things that was keeping me up was I believe this was always on the back burner to potentially cause some of the glitches. I think those three talented leaders did a wonderful job of crafting a great bill. So we'll see something come out. We'll try and keep you posted. We, like you, are watching the verdict as it comes out, and some of the movement that will happen here, hopefully today, to get this thing done so you all can enjoy summer too. So thank you. Thanks, folks.
sentencing is scheduled to begin in about 10 minutes from now at 1:30 in Judge Peter Cahill's courtroom. We want to start first, though, with our reporter Paul Bloom, who's been covering this trial since the very beginning. He joins us now from outside of the Hennepin County Government Center. And Paul, I want to start with a little bit of developing news here today, because earlier in the day, court records show that Judge Peter Cahill actually denied the defense motion for a new trial.
Yeah, some news already being made today, just minutes away now from this historic sentencing in the murder of George Floyd. Judge Cahill, before issuing sentence, did deny defense motions here, basically asking for a new trial. The defense had argued on several fronts, including the idea that there was a tainted jury because Judge Cahill didn't move the trial out of Hennepin County. They were concerned about prosecutorial misconduct, citing grievous errors made throughout the trial process. No surprise there that Judge Cahill would reject those arguments, and that Judge Cahill presided over the entirety of the trial and likely believed it was fair and just. And in the end, after 10 hours of deliberations, this jury coming back with a guilty verdict. Now, the other interesting motion that was denied by Judge Cahill in advance of sentencing, the defense had also asked for a special, what's known as a Schwartz hearing, where a judge will basically probe the intentions, probe jurors who had deliberated. For those of you who followed this trial closely, one of the jurors who had spoken out after the verdict, we would come to find out he had attended a march in Washington where the focus of that march, police brutality, Floyd family members were there. That was not disclosed during the jury questioning, and basically the defense had asked for at least Judge Cahill to take a look at the possibility of some jury misconduct in this case. The judge denied that motion as well. So now we move ahead to sentencing again, just a few minutes away. All eyes really on probably two people today, right? Derek Chauvin, does he allocute? Does he say something in the courtroom? And of course, then Judge Cahill, the decision on punishment very much in Cahill's hands. He's got a lot to think about. The defense is asking for basically no jail time already served, probation. They argue that Derek Chauvin has no criminal record, was really just basically a victim here of a broken policing system. He has a support network at home. They say he's done enough time. It is time for Judge Cahill to send him home on a strict probationary sentence. Obviously not likely to happen here. Prison guidelines, typically in a second-degree murder conviction, is usually 12 and a half years for somebody with no criminal history. 12 and a half years, the presumed sentence. And the state here arguing for 30 years, so a big jump there. And the reason why they are making that argument is because of some of the aggravating factors. The fact that Chauvin abused his position of authority, the amount of cruelty involved in the homicide, the 9.5 minutes on George Floyd's neck and back at 38th and Chicago, and the fact that this crime unfolded in front of children. So again, Judge Cahill, probation, 12 and a half years, 30 years. He's going to likely fall somewhere in between. I've talked to legal experts. My guess, we're looking at 25 to 30. We'll see. Again, now just minutes away before Derek Chauvin and the rest of the world learns his fate.
And Paul, we've seen some sentencing hearings last as short as 5 minutes. What do you anticipate this afternoon, and who do you think we'll hear from when we think about those impact statements?
My initial thought had been that Judge Cahill would keep this kind of tidy to that nice hour time frame. Those typically, when I cover sentencings in courtrooms where judges kind of keep strict calendars, it was 1 hour. There is some indication from the courtroom today that this could stretch into 2 hours. We understand both sides. Although they presented their arguments in written form, there will be some arguing over the prison term, why he should get less, why he should get more. There will be victim impact statements. I'm expecting to hear from at least 4 Floyd family members about the impact of losing George Floyd in such a public manner. And then it will be up to, Derek Chauvin to decide whether he wants to say something finally in court. He has a lot at risk, though. Remember, he's also facing federal charges, and anything he says in this courtroom can be used against him across the street in the federal courthouse. And then finally, we will get to Judge Cahill sending down his sentence. We are told there will be a 15-minute break somewhere in there today. So again, I would anticipate now, BC, to be honest with you, we're probably looking more in that 90 minutes to 2-hour range.
All right, Paul, thank you so much. Paul Bloom reporting for us live downtown, just outside the Government Center. We want to check in now with trial attorney Lee Hutton for some more perspective on what we can expect today. Thanks again for being with us during this journey, Lee.
Hi, good afternoon.
Yeah, so I just want to mention, as Paul mentioned, Minnesota sentencing guidelines call for 12.5 years, but there are some aggregating factors here. Can you tell us, is it now easy to assume that he will receive a longer sentence?
I think that's exactly correct. I mean, especially with the high profile nature of this particular case, and the prosecution, of course, coming after a victory, did the factors, and the judge is going to apply the facts to the factors. One, that he abused his position of authority. Two, he acted with cruelty, which quite frankly, I think that video was very impactful for the jurors and quite frankly, the world. Third, he acted in concert with other individuals. And then that final component was that he did all this in the presence of children. And many of them testified, and they just didn't testify to the facts. They testified remarkably that I think was the demise in Chauvin's defense.
Lee, I want to ask you a little bit more about this, because in the judge's orders here on the aggravating factors, he wrote, and I'm going to quote this, "It was particularly cruel to kill George Floyd by slowly preventing his ability to breathe." Now, if we take out that sentence alone, does that give us any indication as to the mind frame of the judge in applying a sentence today?
You're absolutely right. And many attorneys, when we get orders, we try to read into what the judge is thinking. And Judge Cahill, throughout the trial, was very meticulous. And when he makes a statement that draws out a slow, drawn-out death, to me as a trial attorney, that tells me that the judge has considered and has determined that Chauvin had the ability and every reason to get up, had the ability and every reason to know that George Floyd was in pain, and had every reason and to know that George Floyd, through his action, could eventually have terminal death, and that was the result. So I think that passage alone, I would not be surprised if the judge agrees with the prosecution and grants 30 years, or sentence Chauvin to 30 years.
Mm-hmm. And Lee, we know that there will be victim impact statements throughout this hearing today. Considering that Derek Chauvin is facing federal charges as well, how likely is it that you think we'll hear from him as well?
Wow, what a big decision to make. However, you know, this is his one time to maybe impact and to tell the world who's watching what he's thinking that may help his situation at the federal court trial. Right now, the fact that he's been convicted in this particular case, you can't run from that. You can't hide from that. And that result is going to be taken over to the federal trial, and the jurors are going to know that that happened. So they're going to have to balance the risk. And personally, if it was my client, this is something that we would have to have many discussions to see, number one, if from a personality standpoint, he can pull it off and be very direct and humble himself to show that the facts that were on TV and the facts that came out in trial are incongruent to who he actually is. And most importantly, does he have the capacity to rehabilitate himself? You know, does he have the capacity to reflect on his actions and make a change for the better? So if he can articulate that, then I think he's going to have to say something. But that's a very, very responsible and high task to meet.
Lee, the proceedings are getting underway here at any moment now. Walk our viewers through exactly what they're going to see here this afternoon.
So they're going to start with argument. The prosecution is going to argue their filed motions, why they believe that this should be an upward departure, so higher than the sentence. The defense, in turn, is going to argue their defense, and they're going to say, which I think they argued probation, time served, and apply facts to that. They're going to use the fact that Chauvin has 0 points from a criminal score, the fact that he was an officer, and the judge already having heard or considered these motions. This is more time for the attorneys to argue this in open court, get their words onto the record in anticipation for the appeal, which is has to be filed within 90 days from tomorrow. And after the attorneys make those arguments, the next step is the victim impact statements. And what I understand is the family member for George Floyd are going to say something I think is going to be impactful, is going to be powerful. They're going to show that Chauvin's action took their loved one from them, and then we'll see if Chauvin actually takes the stand.
Lee, we're going to interrupt you right there because the judge is now walking to the courtroom. Let's now take you to Judge Peter Cahill
versus Derek Michael Chauvin. District Court file number is 27 CR 20-12646. Matters on for sentencing. Counsel, note your appearances beginning with the state.
Good afternoon, Matthew Frank, Assistant Attorney General on behalf of the state.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Jerry Blackwell for the state of Minnesota.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Steve Swisher on behalf of the state of Minnesota.
Your Honor, Keith Ellison, Attorney General on behalf of the state of Minnesota.
And for the defense.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. Eric Nelson and Amy Voss appearing on behalf of Mr. Chauvin.
Thank you. We are still, for all those attending, under somewhat modified COVID restrictions, so we are asking that everyone keep their masks on unless they are speaking. I'll ask for people who are speaking to come up to the lectern and use the microphones, and please to remove your mask so that we can hear you clearly, and also to maintain the distances that we have set out in the courtroom. With that, we'll proceed first with the state. Mr. Blackwell, you may proceed with victim input.
Your Honor, we have 4 victim impact statements. We will start with the 7-year-old daughter of George Floyd, Gianna Floyd, who will present hers by video.
What do you miss most about your daddy?
Well, I ask about him all the time. And that's kind of it.
Yeah. Well, when you ask about him, what are you asking about?
Well, I was asking, how did my dad get hurt?
Do you wish that he was still here with us?
Yeah, but he is.
Through his spirit?
Yes.
Yes. And when you see your daddy again one day, what do you want to do when you see him?
I want to play with him.
What kind of games do you want to play with him?
I want to play with him, have fun, go on a plane ride, and that's it.
Yeah.
We used to have dinner meals every single night before we went to bed. My daddy always used to help me brush my teeth.
Oh. Do you miss him helping brush your teeth?
Yes.
How do you hope that the world remembers him?
Well, they help him because those mean people did something to him.
Yeah. If you could say anything to your daddy right now, what would it be?
It would be, I miss you and I love you.
All right. Thank you, Gianna. I really appreciate you answering questions today.
That was Gianna Floyd. Your Honor, next we'll hear from the nephew of George Floyd, Brandon Williams. Mr. Williams.
If you could begin by giving us your full name and spelling each of your names.
Brandon Williams, BRANDON WILLIAMS.
Thank you. You may proceed.
On Monday, May 25th, 2020. George Perry Floyd Jr. was murdered by Derek Chauvin in a malicious and insidious display of hate and abuse of power. Shovin killed George. Not only did he kill George, but he also displayed a total lack of consideration for human life as he did so. You saw it, I saw it, and millions of people across this country and the globe witnessed the act of hate. A year and 1 month later, I stand there before you tasked with the duty of expressing how George's death has impacted me personally and the rest of our family. As I racked my brain and thought about what I could say today, I came to this conclusion. It is humanly impossible for me to stand here and convey or articulate the right words that would capture all that we are feeling and what we have felt over this period. So please bear with me. But not as nearly unimaginable as the defendant's decision to take the life of a human being with no regard for the effect it may have on others. Although Chauvin will be sentenced today and spend time in prison, he will have the luxury of seeing his family again, talking to them, and he will likely get to spend time with them upon his release. These are all luxuries that my young cousin Gianna was robbed of when Chauvin made the active decision to kill our father. There will be no more birthday parties, no graduations, holiday gatherings, or other family celebrations. The laughter, hugs, guidance, advice, sense of security, and those opportunities to simply say I love you are forever gone. They say time heals all, and while I generally believe that saying, it's challenging to do so given these unfathomable set of circumstances. Before I conclude, I must highlight a few things. George's murder, this trial, and everything in between has been tragic and devastating. Our family is forever broken. And one thing we cannot get back is George Floyd. It is the request of my family that the maximum penalty for the crime for which the defendant was convicted be imposed. On behalf of my family, friends, community, and supporters, I wish to express my sincerest gratitude for allowing us opportunities of expression. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Your Honor, first, just for the record, this wonderful lady standing here is a Hennepin County victim advocate.
Ms. Boswell is well known to the court.
Yes, thank you, Judge.
And so, Your Honor, we'll next hear from the brother of George Floyd, Mr. Terrence Floyd.
And Mr. Floyd, if you could state your full name, spelling each of your names.
Yes. Terrence Floyd, that's Terrence, Floyd, Floyd.
Go ahead.
I'm here representing my brother. I'm from New York. On May 25th, 2020, my brother was murdered, everyone knows, by Derek Chauvin. The facts of this case were proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and 3 guilty verdicts have been rendered. This situation has really affected me and my family. Any family member that has went through this, we are part of a fraternity of families, and it's not one of those, fraternities that you enjoy. I just, over this last year and months, I actually talked to a few people, and I wanted to know from the man himself, why? What were you thinking? What was going through your head when you had your knee on my brother's neck? Why when you knew that he posed no threat anymore, he was handcuffed, why you didn't at least get up? Why you stayed there?
You take your time.
A month before my brother was murdered, I was on the phone with him, and we had a long conversation. And as I looked at the video of my niece, the last conversation me and my brother had was he wanted to have play dates. He wanted to plan play dates with Gianna and my daughter. And we started setting it up. That can't happen. And I have to, my daughter's still young, but I still have to explain to her, because this is history. This is a case everybody knows about. So she's gonna find out, and I'm gonna have to explain that to her. And I think that's, to me, harder than even just standing here, that I have to talk to my daughter and tell her, you know, about her niece, about her uncle, about the situation. That's basically reliving it all over again, years down the line. I'm here on behalf of my family, on behalf of me and my family, we seek the maximum penalty. We don't want to see no more slaps on the wrist. We've been through that already. In my community, in my culture, we've been through that already. Smacked on the wrist. No. Because if it was us, if the roles was reversed, there wouldn't be no case. It would have been open and shut. We'd have been under the jail for murdering somebody. So we asked for that same penalty for Derek Chauvin. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Your Honor, the final victim impact statement for the state will come from George Floyd's brother, Phalonis Floyd.
And sir, if you could begin by giving us your full name and spell each of your names, and I have permitted you to use your phone because you have notes on it, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, and you may proceed when you're ready. Giving us your full name first.
Phalonis Floyd, spelled Philonise, last name Floyd, Floyd.
And you may proceed.
One year ago, May 25th, my brother George was murdered by Derek Chauvin and his co-defendants in broad daylight with a knee to his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. I was a trucker, and immediately my life changed forever. I began to speak to the world for George from the United Nations, Africa, Canada, Japan, and so many other countries. Every day, I have begged for justice to be served, reliving the execution of George, while others begged and pleaded for Officer Chauvin to simply just allow George to take a breath. I haven't had a real night's sleep because of the nightmares I constantly have hearing my brother beg and plead for his life over and over again. Even saying, "They going to kill me. Please, officer." Screaming for our mom. I have had to sit through each day of Officer Derek Chauvin's trial and watch the video of George dying for hours over and over again. For an entire year, I had to relive George being tortured to death every hour of the day, only taking naps and not knowing what a good night's sleep is anymore. I've been lifting my voice tirelessly every day so that George's death will not be in vain. Honorable Judge Peter Cahill, I thank you for allowing me to share this today. George's life mattered. So my family and I, most of all, my niece, Gianna. My niece, Gianna, she needs closure. I'm asking that you please find it suitable to give Officer Chauvin the maximum sentence possible, charge that he has been found guilty for. My family and I have been given a life sentence. We will never be able to get George back. Daddy's our daughter's first love. He would never be able to walk Gianna down the aisle at her wedding, attend those magical moments of her life like a daddy-daughter dance, sweet 16 party, seeing her out for prom graduations, and she would never be able to have any personal memories with her father. With a smirk on his face and children present, Officer Chauvin used excessive force and acted against his training. Chauvin had no regards for human life, George's life. I stand before you today asking you to please help us find closure by giving Chauvin the maximum sentence possible, making sure he does his time consecutively without the possibilities of parole, probation, or getting out early for good behavior. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Frank.
Thank you, Your Honor. Here today, of course, for sentencing, gives us an opportunity to speak about other matters that I think are involved in sentencing and where we are in the criminal justice system in the processing of this case. As a member of an elected office representing the people of the state of Minnesota, as well as the people of the local community, I want to say a couple of things. And first of all, I want to really thank some of the police officers at the Minneapolis Police Department who, under great pressure, great stress, and to some extent at peril to their occupations, what they've devoted their life to, stuck to their oath and their commitment as police officers to speak openly and honestly about policing and the training that is given and received by police officers. Those officers didn't hide behind a blue wall. They came forward, they told this court and those jurors what they knew about training and responsibility, and I think they deserve recognition and credit for that. I would also like to thank members of the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. Those agents get called in, great sacrifice to their personal lives. Whenever things happen, they go. They did that here, and under really extraordinary circumstances, completed a very professional and thorough investigation. Conducting interviews is hard enough, but conducting them in the atmosphere of the city following the murder of George Floyd was even more difficult. And they did so, I think, above and beyond the call of duty. And I want to thank them for doing that on behalf of the whole prosecution staff. Your Honor, I want to thank the family, the loved ones, the friends of George Floyd. They have been through so much more than families involved in murder cases. He's right. It's a fraternity you don't want to be part of. But they've been through so much more because of the pandemic and because of security, safety precautions that we've had to take. They have been through a lot. At a time when they try to grieve, like everybody does for the loss of someone, they are going through so much more. And I want to thank them, all of them, the family. The court saw a testimony from Philonise Floyd, Courtney Ross. These are people who are trying to deal with their loss, but they have to do it in a very public way and under very trying circumstances through no fault of their own. So I thank them. They have all been models of grace and understanding. And it's really remarkable, quite frankly. I'll, I think, come back to them again in a little bit. Your Honor, we have submitted a sentencing brief. I would incorporate that. I guess I would incorporate my comments today into that memo. But I do think there are things that I want to bring out today in my arguments. For hundreds of years, the court had discretion in sentencing. It was the trial court's decision on what a sentence should be. The recognition that the trial court sat through the trial, watched the evidence, and saw how it affected people, informed the court's discretion. When the legislature passed the guidelines, in a legitimate attempt to try and even out sentences, they defined certain presumptive sentences, as we all know, for typical crimes. For each crime, the typical crime. But they did not remove discretion for sentencing judges. They recognized that nobody is better suited to decide whether this is the typical case represented by that guideline's presumptive sentence, or if there are reasons why this is worse than that. And it gave, and the guideline still gives this court discretion when there are aggravating factors to give a more serious sentence than what the guideline's presumption calls for. And as you know, we are asking you to do that today. As this court found, there are 4 aggravating factors that we have identified. They go beyond a list of just what those factors are. We have not just done our homework and found a list. The court made good findings, detailed findings about those factors, and we think they justify a greatly increased sentence. This is not the typical second-degree unintentional murder. The Supreme Court in our state has said that, and very recently, even 1 aggravating factor is sufficient to go twice the top of the range. Here we have 4. The first one that the court found is an abusive position of trust and authority. And the court specifically found that when Mr. Chauvin was acting as a police officer, he had a position of trust and authority. That is certainly true. We trust police officers. We trust them when we need help. We call them for help. We trust that they're going to take care of the problems that they are assigned to deal with, right? We trust them. We also give them great authority. We give them great power. We give them power to use force that individuals would be prosecuted for using, right? We give them authority to arrest, to detain. And with great power, of course, comes great responsibility. So they're not sent out there by themselves to do this. They're given substantial training. This court saw all of that through the trial, in general and in specific to Mr. Chauvin and the other 3 officers. They're given training on the use of force, the proportional use of force. The force used has to be warranted by the threat. They're given training on de-escalation because we recognize that police officers are called in when people are not having their best day, when people might be affected by mental illness, drug abuse, any number of issues. They're just having a bad day, and they're trained for that and should be. And they're taught how to use that to de-escalate and control a situation. They're taught medical intervention. They're taught to provide medical attention to people who need it. Being a police officer is a difficult job. We ask a lot of them. It's a profession, there's no doubt about it. But we give them a substantial amount of training, and most officers do it right. This case wasn't about police officers, all police officers. It wasn't about policing. This case was about Derek Chauvin disregarding all that training he received and assaulting Mr. Floyd until he suffocated to death. One of the things that you heard, Your Honor, and the jurors heard that can really encapsulate, I think, a very important issue here. 7 words. In your custody is in your care. And it's a real simple mantra. It's a real easy thing to remember. You're going to take custody of somebody, you have to provide care. You have to do it in a caring way. You can't simply disregard their care. Mr. Chauvin abused his position of trust and authority as a police officer by doing just that, just disregarding all his training. It was an abuse of that because what did he decide to do? We often are forced in this, criminal justice system to infer people's state of mind by their conduct and their statements. What was Derek Chauvin's endgame here? What was the plan? It seems apparent the plan was hold him down until we can dump him in an ambulance and no longer have him be our problem. You recall he said to Charles McMillan, he's a big guy, might be on something. That's it. He held Mr. Floyd down as Mr. Floyd begged for his life. He had the other officers help in that regard. And rather than doing the simple expedient of putting him on his side, he said, yeah, He was dismissive to that duty of care. We trust that arrestees will be treated with respect, reasonable force, and that their medical needs will be addressed. I'm paraphrasing from the court's findings. That trust was violated. We trust that they will use their authority reasonably, and this was a particularly egregious abuse of that force. Again, paraphrasing the court's findings. The typical second-degree murder does not involve that extent of abuse of a dearly held position of abuse or a position of authority and trust by the community and by individuals of the community. Your Honor found that Mr. Floyd was treated by Mr. Chauvin with particular cruelty. I think tortured is the right word. We know that, we've all seen it. Mr. Floyd did not want to be in the back seat. That's it. That's the rub. It was the need to get him in that back seat no matter what. And we all saw that once he was pulled out of that back seat, he calmed right down. He even willingly went down to the ground. I'm going down, he said. And he went down to the ground, not fighting, not punching, and he was placed initially on his side. He's already handcuffed. He's placed on his side in the recovery position, like he should be, because he's trying to breathe, and then quickly placed prone on the ground, face down. Mr. Chauvin put his left knee on George Floyd's neck, his right knee on George Floyd's back, face down on the pavement. Had Officer King sit on Mr. Floyd's waist area, and had Officer Lane hold his feet down. You can even see Mr. Floyd trying to pull his feet up. We all are going to fight to breathe. Everybody knows that fear when you all of a sudden realize you're having trouble breathing. It's just innate, right? We want to survive. We know we have to breathe. And there's an automatic reaction when you begin to feel like that is threatened. And you can see Mr. Floyd going through that. He tries to pull his feet up. But he's held down by these three officers while Officer Tao is looking on. And later, of course, goes to keep the people who want to help away. He's placed face down in this pavement so harshly that it rubs the skin off his face. He has injuries to his face from being face down on that pavement. He has injuries to his knuckles from just trying to lift himself up. And he's telling Officer Chauvin, I can't breathe. I'm dying. And Mr. Chauvin's response was, And all this time, I mean, imagine what Mr. Floyd is going through. If we're going to talk about particular cruelty and torture, really try to appreciate what he's going through. He knows he's suffocating. We all know that feeling of not being able to breathe enough. And he's begging, he's pleading, and he's being ignored. His concerns are being dismissed by somebody who has taken custody but not care. He was kept in that prone position for 9.5 minutes and was suffocated. There's no other way to say it. That's particularly cruel. That is more cruel than a typical second-degree unintentional murder. Significantly more. This is not a momentary gunshot, punch to the face. This is 9.5 minutes of cruelty to a man who was helpless and just begging for his life. This court found that there were children present, standing only a few feet from these officers. These children, who were ages 17 and one child age 9. Why is that an aggravating factor? Well, I think everybody can figure that out. Right? It's particularly bad to commit a crime in front of children. We've heard a lot of academia about the development of the young brain and how long it can take. And here you got a couple of teenage girls, a 9-year-old girl. How are they going to process this? Standing feet from a man being suffocated by police officers. Such a stark sight that one of the children even says, we got to call the police on the police. How do you process that as a 9-year-old? The children were not only present watching a man die. We've all seen, if you haven't, you really need to. Look at George Floyd's face. As he's dying, he's suffering. The children have to watch this. But not only that, it's police officers, and there are people around them wanting to help. And at one point, and sure, they got upset. And at one point, Mr. Chauvin points his mace, grabs his mace to keep him back. How does a child look at that? There's another officer screaming at them to get back. The typical second-degree unintentional murder doesn't involve children standing feet away watching a 9.5-minute suffocation of a man begging for his life. This court also made a finding that the defendant committed the offense with the involvement of 3 or more other persons. Lane and King were involved directly in the restraint, and that Tao kept the bystanders at bay. I've already talked a little bit about Lane and King's role in holding Mr. Floyd down. They recognized that he was pulseless, that Mr. Floyd was pulseless at one point, and yet really made no effort to take care of the person in their custody. Officer Tao watched most of the suffocation and then only went over to keep people from giving help. One person who is identified as a medical trained firefighter for the city of Minneapolis, and that was dismissed. Like, what, are we going to believe her? So they kept trained medical people from providing help. These were all uniformed peace officers, adding to that abuse of trust and authority. You know, I know the defense has asked the court for probation. I'm not going to spend a lot of time arguing that. It's so outside of the realm of, I think, real possibility. This is a murder. I understand some of the arguments made on behalf of Mr. Chauvin. I understand, well, no, I can't understand what his family members and friends are going through. I can't. But it's certainly not enough for a departure to probation for a second-degree murder. We believe, Your Honor, that these 4 aggravating factors and the findings that the court has made certainly justify an upward departure because there are 4 of them, not standing alone, but in a sense, not overlapping, but coming together to show this is not the typical second-degree murder. This is egregious. And this justifies a double upward departure. From the top of the box, which is 180 months, we're asking the court to do a double departure, recognizing all 4 factors, to 360 months. As I mentioned before, Your Honor, this is sentencing. This is the time for victims, right? This is the time for the loved ones of the victim and the community to have a say. Again, I commend this family. I commend all of the loved ones, the friends, the people that have been involved in this case for tolerating and being gracious. None of this, of course, can bring George Floyd back. That's very true. But this is the time for our criminal justice system to say, we hear you. This is the time for their criminal justice system to say, we recognize that this harm you're going through is real, and while we can't feel what you're feeling, we know we can do what your criminal justice system should do and recognize the severity of this crime and reflect that in the sentence to be given. It's time for this criminal justice system to say, we recognize this is more serious than the typical second-degree unintentional murder. The 4 reasons the court found reflect that and give this court more than an adequate basis to do that. Your Honor, we ask the court to impose a sentence of 360 months, commitment to the Commissioner of Corrections. As you know, Your Honor, there are no fines in murder cases. And we would ask the court just to reserve the issue of restitution, so we can clarify that with the family and present that to the court for 30 days. Thank you, Your Honor.
Anything further from the state?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Mr. Nelson. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Blackwell?
Sorry, Your Honor, just thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, at this time, the defendant's mother, Carolyn Palenti, would like to address the court.
Right. If you could state your full name, spelling each of your names, and proceed when you're ready.
Yes. Carolyn, C-A-R-O-L-Y-N, Palenti, P-A-W-L-E-N-T-Y. I am the mother of Derek Chauvin. I am here to speak on behalf of my entire family. On November 25th, 2020, Not only did Derek's life change forever, but so did mine and my family's. Derek devoted 19 years of his life to the Minneapolis Police Department. It has been difficult for me to hear and read what the media, public, and prosecution team believe Derek to be an aggressive, heartless, and uncaring person. I can tell you that is far from the truth. My son's identity has also been reduced to that as a racist. I want this court to know that none of these things are true and that my son is a good man. Derek always dedicated his life and time to the police department. Even on his days off, he would call in to see if they needed help. Derek is a quiet, thoughtful, honorable, and selfless man. He has a big heart, and he always has put others before his own. The public will never know the loving and caring man he is, but his family does. Even though I have not spoken publicly, I have always supported him 100% and always will. Derek has played over and over in his head the events of that day. I've seen the toll it has taken on him. I believe a lengthy sentence will not serve Derek well. When you sentence my son, you will also be sentencing me. I will not be able to see Derek, talk to him on the phone, or give him our special hug. Plus the fact that when he is released, his father and I most likely will not be here. Derek, my happiest moment is when I gave birth to you. And my second is when I was honored to pin your police badge on you. I remember you whispering to me, "Don't stick me with it." Derek, I want you to know I have always believed in your innocence, and I will never waver from that. I have read numerous letters from people around the world that also believe in your innocence. No matter where you go, where you are, I will always be there to visit you. I promise you I will stay strong, as we talked about, and I want you to do the same for me. I will do what you told me to do, take care of myself, so I will be here for you when you come home. Remember, there is no stronger bond or love than a mother's love. And one final thought I want you to remember. Remember, you are my favorite son. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. It is my intent that my remarks this afternoon be quite brief. I do not intend to relitigate the facts of this case, nor spend any substantial time looking at the law. The court is very familiar with the facts of this case, and the parties have fully briefed the court relevant to the sentencing factors. And we recognize that in any case, any sentencing that comes before the court is tasked with a difficult job. The court must craft a sentence that serves the interests of justice, a rather nebulous term. The court must take into consideration the victim impact, public interests, as well as the circumstances and the history of the defendant. And in this case, more than any other, that likely any of us have ever been involved in, that task is exceedingly more difficult. In my remarks today, I just wish to briefly address each of those three considerations, starting with the public impact. As I believe we are all cognizant of, this case is at the epicenter of a cultural and political divide. We tried to keep a lot of that out of the courtroom during the trial and make this case about the facts. But we recognize what has happened as a result of this case. There are a great number of people who will view any sentence you pronounce as overly lenient and insufficient to satisfy justice. But there are an equal number of people who will view any sentence you pronounce as draconian or overbearing. Either way, some percentage of the public will view your sentence as a miscarriage of justice. The intensity of the public interest in this case cannot be understated. I trust that the volume of correspondence that each of us has received from the public at large is indicative of these very sentiments on both sides. As I was informed just yesterday, the Attorney General's office established a website, web submission, to accept community impact statements. Again, in my understanding is in a little over 2 weeks, they received over 1,000 submissions. Again, on both sides. By my very best estimate, since my representation of Mr. Chauvin began last summer, I would estimate that I have received over 5,000 emails, over 1,000 voicemails, and hundreds of handwritten letters. Again, from both sides. And I expect that Your Honor has likewise been inundated with public comment and scrutiny. The impact that this case has had on this community is profound. It goes far beyond what happened on May 25th of last year. It has been at the forefront of our national consciousness, and it has weaved its way into nearly every facet of our lives, from the entertainment that we consume to the presidential politics, from protests to conspiracy theories. In the end, it is my sincere hope that when this proverbial dust settles, the community impact brings forth principled debate and civil public discourse, and ultimately leaves a positive effect on the city of Minneapolis, the state of Minnesota, and the United States. But nevertheless, while this court may consider the community impact, it is for these very same reasons that the court must turn to the foundational legal principles and remember that justice is blind. Law is built on reason and common sense, and it cannot be permitted to be assailed by public opinion. Turning to the second consideration, which is the victim impact, the death of George Floyd. The death of George Floyd was tragic. He is loved by his family members. He is loved by his friends, and his death is justifiably mourned by those whose lives he impacted. He is a son, he is a brother, a father, an uncle, and a friend to many. And as the court heard today, the impact and the loss of his life, simply just, it can't be simplified. And it will take time. Finally, Your Honor, the court must take into consideration, just like it has to take into consideration the aggravating factors, it needs to take into consideration the mitigating factors. And the mitigating factors as set forth by the sentencing guidelines really point to the TROG analysis, essentially, ultimately in this case. We're not going to spend a lot of time, again, arguing for a probationary sentence. That's briefed. But that being said, when we look at the TROG factors, who is Derek Chauvin? Derek Chauvin spent 19 years as a Minneapolis police officer. He loved being a police officer. I was contacted during the course of my representation and have had numerous conversations with his fellow police officers or fellow police officers that worked with Derek, some retired, some still active. And they told me that he was a solid police officer, that he did his job, that if somebody asked him to do a particular task, he never complained, he did it. One person told me that one of his sergeants told me that if I had asked him to dig a ditch for 8 hours, he would have picked up a shovel and he would have never complained for a second. He would have done his job. He was decorated as a police officer, multiple life-saving awards. He was decorated for valor. He was proud to be a police officer because what he liked to do was help people. And as the statistics show, the vast majority of police work is helping people. He was proud to be a Minneapolis police officer. He served his country as the United States in the United States Army. And he too is a son and a brother and a father and a friend. He too, his life, the life he's lived, he's not coming into this as a career criminal with 6 points, 5 points, 4 points. He's coming into this never having violated the law because he lived an honorable life and he attempted to live an honorable life. Derek Chauvin was not even scheduled to work on May 25th, 2020. He volunteered because there was short staffing at the time. I know from numerous conversations that I've had with Derek that his brain is littered with what ifs. What if I just had not agreed to go in that day? What if things had gone differently? What if I never responded to that call? What if, what if, what if? The truth of the matter is, and the end result is that we are here after a jury verdict, finding him guilty of these offenses. And the court's consideration should not only be focused on the aggravating factors, but the mitigating factors as well. The Minnesota Sentencing Guidelines Commission was established for a reason. And yes, the court in circumstances like these has discretion to go beyond and aggravate a sentence beyond the presumptive sentences established by the sentencing guidelines. But the sentencing guidelines don't differentiate between second-degree murders. Someone robs a liquor store, a police officer is involved in an incident, and a person dies in police custody. The law presumes, the legislature presumes, that the sentencing guidelines, as established, is a sufficient penalty for all of the second-degree murder categories or cases you would see. From 2019 back to 2010, a total of 90 people were sentenced for second-degree murder. Those sentences, those people, there were more than that, but people who had a 0 criminal history score, more than 90 people were sentenced. 67%, or 60 of those 90 people, received a guideline sentence of 150 months. So 2/3 of all people in this same position received a guideline sentence. 20% received an aggravated sentence, 18 of the 90, and 13%, or 12 individuals, were granted mitigated departures. So if the legislature and the intent of the sentencing guidelines is to eliminate sentencing disparity, the law should presume that the guideline sentence is what is appropriate in this case. The judge you may take into consideration at this point those aggravating factors, but you have to counterbalance them, which is the goal of the law, with the mitigating factors. I know that this has been an incredibly difficult case for the Floyd family to have to endure. The state of Minnesota, likewise, the prosecutors in this case have endured quite a bit, as has Mr. Chauvin's family. This is a case that has changed the world to some degree, and I hope it's positive. But it's my hope that the court follows the sentencing guidelines, applies the law in a reasoned manner, and imposes a just sentence.
Actually, Mr. Shovin, would you join Mr. Nelson at the lectern? Mr. Chauvin, this is your opportunity if you wish to give any input to the court. And so I turn it over to you and your attorney.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, due to some additional legal matters at hand, I'm not able to give a full formal statement at this time. But very briefly, though, I do want to give my condolences to the Floyd family. There's going to be some other information in the future that would be of interest, and I hope things will give you some peace of mind. Thank you.
And I'll note that I did read your comments in the pre-sentence investigation as well.
Thanks, Ron.
All right, we are going to take a 15-minute recess so that I can complete the sentencing order based on what I've heard today. And let's reconvene at 2:45. We're in recess.
And thank you so much for joining us for our live special coverage of the Derek Chauvin sentencing. The court right now taking a 15-minute break. Proceedings began this afternoon about an hour ago at 1:30. We first heard 4 impact statements. One from 7-year-old Gianna. She is the daughter of George Floyd. We also heard from 2 of his brothers and a nephew. And the court also hearing this afternoon from Carolyn Palenti. She is Derek Chauvin's mother. And among many things, she described her son as a good man.
In fact, some of the emotional, the testimony, very emotional, not only from Derek Chauvin's mother, but from the family of George Floyd as well. In fact, Terrence Floyd, his brother, had to wipe away the tears often, as did Philonise Floyd. Terrence saying at one point, I want to know from the man himself as why. He's talking about Derek Chauvin. What were you thinking? What was going through your head when you had your knee on his neck? Why did you stay there? And again, wiping away the tears at the time, and then contrast that with the mother of Derek Chauvin, who got at the stand, and Carolyn Palenti, who said, Derek has played over and over again in his head the event of that day. When you will be sentencing my son, talking directly to Judge Cahill, you will be sentencing me too.
And what I thought was also very interesting, a lot of us were wondering, would we hear from Derek Chauvin himself? And just a few minutes ago, he stood up and faced George Floyd's family and apologized and said that there would be future and more information coming out in the future. Right now we want to get straight to Fox 9's Paul Bloom, who has been following the developments in court. He is live outside the Government Center in downtown Minneapolis. And Paul, some big takeaways this afternoon.
Absolutely, BC and Tim, we're watching from the media center across the street. We do have a couple pool reporters inside the courtroom, as we did during trial. Be interested to hear just some of the, read some of their comments of what is happening outside of the eyes and ears of the cameras and microphones that we are all watching, but certainly compelling. As you mentioned, starting out right off the bat, basically the sentencing began sharply at 1:30, immediately went into victim impact statements. A little bit different than other sentencing hearings that I have covered, and immediately up popped Gianna Floyd, George Floyd's 7-year-old daughter. I think that looked like it was a video recorded cell phone conversation with her where she said she misses her daddy, she loves him. Then you mentioned to the brothers, the one Terrence talking directly basically to Derek Chauvin. He didn't look at him. He continued to face a judge, which you are supposed to do during victim impact statements, but basically wanted to know what Derek Chauvin was thinking when he had his knee on George Floyd's neck and back for some 9.5 minutes. A nephew, who were like brothers, we were told they were Mr. Williams, who they had a lifelong bond with George Floyd, his uncle, and then finally Philonis Floyd, perhaps the most recognizable of the Floyd family members. So 4 victim impact statements from the family. The prosecution wrapping up its case as it relates to sentencing with Matthew Frank. Of course, he in the Attorney General's office wanting this Judge Peter Cahill, to go to basically 30 years in prison. That is the target the state is seeking. They said this second-degree unintentional murder, yes, there are parameters, yes, there are sentencing guidelines, but this was not your typical unintentional second-degree murder. Derek Chauvin should be sentenced above and beyond sentencing guidelines. Judge Cahill has found aggravating factors, so now we wait, just minutes away now before Judge Cahill will impose sentence. And of course, a real shocker today, we didn't know exactly who we would hear from on Chauvin's side. Obviously, we knew Eric Nelson would speak. He kind of pitched this idea of probation, that Derek Chauvin has absolutely no criminal record, that part of a broken system, remorse, that you could send him home and you know that Derek Chauvin will be law-abiding going forward. And the defense basically enhanced that argument with his mother, this mom who said, she clearly emotional there, but said the proudest moment or the best moment of her life was giving birth to him. The second greatest moment of her life was pinning that Minneapolis police badge on Derek Chauvin's chest. So that was quite a remarkable moment in court. And now, at the very end, before we took that 15-minute recess, Derek Chauvin coming up. He alluded to some more information coming out, and because of other issues, I assume that meant his federal charges, that he just can't speak publicly in court to stand by. But he did offer condolences. He did turn and face the family members in court. We'll have to get a little bit more detail from our pool reporters, but clearly it looked like he turned towards Floyd family members in court and offered condolences for George Floyd's death. And now the world awaits this 15-minute recess, 2:45, where Judge Cahill will impose his sentence. Again, the state looking for 30 years behind bars. The defense, I think they've backed away maybe from just a simple probation, but they clearly want a much lesser sentence, basically saying Derek Chauvin has devoted his life to law enforcement, never violated the law, basically cut him a break here. His life was important, and he will be sentenced, depriving his mother, his friends, his family of Derek Chauvin for years to come. But obviously we'll await Judge Cahill returning to the bench now as he finalizes his sentencing order.
All right, Paul, stand by there. We may come back to you in a few moments, but I want to bring in Lee Hutton now, our legal advisor in all of this. And Lee, I want to pick up right there where we kind of left off, and that is Derek Chauvin before the judge. And judges are always going to look for remorse. Is the defendant remorseful? We didn't get that word completely out of him today, but he did offer his condolences to the family. Parse out the differences between here and essentially what the judge will be looking for in this.
I can tell you, you hit it right on the head. When I was watching, let's start with the impact statement of his mother. His mother seemed to divert the attention from the actions on the video, which I think is going to be persuasive to the judge and not positive for Derek Chauvin. They basically played the race card when their whole defense was, this is not about race. This is about following the orders of the badge. And I thought that was a big failure, putting it candidly. When you go to Derek Chauvin, while he gave kind of this, not necessarily admission of guilt, but he gave this apology to the family, which is going to be accepted to the judge, and he's going to consider that as somewhat of a remorse. But then he left us with this kind of cliffhanger in a really bad movie, saying that there's going to be more information that's going to come out. Well, if there is, why not say so? If you can't say so, why bring it up? But you did bring it up, and I think the judge is going to be somewhat in kind of purgatory in a sense, but he's eventually going to make the decision that Chauvin's impact statement and his statement was not persuasive in going with the downward departure or even the standard. I think Chauvin's going to get the 30 years.
Here's what Mr. Chauvin said here at the end. I do want to give my condolences to the Floyd family, and then he paused for a moment. There is going to be some other information in the future that I hope will give them some peace of mind. It's tough to speculate here, but is he alluding to a possible, maybe agreement in the federal charges?
You know, that can be possible. It could also be possible that he's going to completely cross the blue line of silence and say that, here's what I can give you, Floyd family, and the rest of the world is an opportunity to really clean up the police department. Maybe that's the case, but we really have to wait and see. And if there was something so impactful that could defend himself, or that could have changed the result of the trial, why not have brought that up into defense? And so this cliffhanger is going to be continued, and I'm curious as everyone else what this information is.
And Lee, defense attorney Eric Nelson, he made mention that this case has been the epicenter of a cultural and political divide, and that much of that was they tried to keep that out of the court proceedings in the process. But what did you make of that statement?
Well, I made up the statement that the defense throughout trial trying to negate the fact that this had some social consequences and to negate the fact that it had some racial issues that needed to be addressed, and for the defense to not address them at all. Hopefully this is kind of a reckoning or coming to the conclusion that this case in fact was about the historical blemish between law enforcement and people of color. This is about the historical blemish, about that certain people are treated differently under the eyes of the law. And so if anything, if this trial is going to have a positive impact, which Nelson alluded to, sooner or later, the police department and others that are involved with this, and this is on both sides of the fence, have to come to some type of conclusion that we're not quite equal under the eyes of the law. And hopefully this is a start moving forward to some type of accountability.
Lee, Matthew Frank, the Assistant Attorney General there, in his arguments before the judge, essentially said this case comes down to 7 words. And those words are, in your custody and in your care. And he used those 7 words as a narrative to essentially argue to the judge that Derek Chauvin dismissed the custody of care. And that's why he needs to exercise his upward departure and go for the full 30 years.
I thought that was the perfect place to rest your theme on. The opening statements with Jerry Blackwell started with those words, and it was supported and corroborated by the fact, not just with the attorneys having you focus on those words, but marketing materials and statements by police officers that said, this is our duty to the badge, this is our oath. And then when you compare that to the actions in the video that are completely incongruent to that mission statement, I think this was a very calculated and impressive move by the state, and I think it was the right one, to show the judge that in one of the elements that he was acting under the duty of an officer, and he did not treat George Floyd in his custody, in his care, the way that they said they will. I think the judge is going to take that in consideration. And again, that is just going to be one of those things that you fill into the bucket that's going to lead to the upward departure.
And Lee, for those who might be just joining us now, we're about 5 minutes away from the judge handing down his sentence. We're in the middle of a 15-minute break. But I'm curious to know, from your point of view, what kind of legal research has been done on judges and impact statements and in final arguments from both the prosecution and the defense? I'm always kind of suspectful of that, of how much of an impact does it really make. Does the judge come in with an idea that, okay, here's what my sentence is going to be, and stick to that? Or do these closing arguments, so to speak, in the final analysis make any difference?
I can tell you, I think the judge, number one, being an officer of the court and being human, looks at it from two different lenses. One, from the lens of a legal practitioner who has to set aside his own emotions. And so what he would do, and that's even before coming into court, is to research kind of the historical components of what an officer in a similar situation has been charged with. But the issue there is that many officers in this type of situation just never been charged at all, let alone convicted. So this is new territory for the judge. And he also understands how impactful this is in his decision to the community of healing and going forward. Now, setting all that aside, I often tell my clients and other legal practitioners that one case doesn't fit all. So you have to treat each case individually. And in this particular case, with the video, 9 minutes, the testimony by young children who saw this, it really kind of checks off all the marks that gives the judge at least some persuasive value to do an upward departure. And I think with the research going in, and he's certainly taken his 15 minutes to determine whether or not the impact statements on both sides, from Chauvin's mother and also from the family members, is going to persuade him a little bit. But I think the judge, even from the sight of the video and hearing the testimony, was pretty certain of where he is. And I think I'm gathering that information from the fact that he denied the new trial, he denied the Schwartz request, and if this verdict is going to change by any means, it's going to change at the Court of Appeals and not at the trial court.
All right, Lee, that's Lee Hutton. Thank you so much. We look forward to catching up with you again later on this broadcast. But right now we want to check in with Fox 9's Leah Bino, who has also been following the developments in our newsroom. And Leah, we are nearing the end of this 15-minute break. We should be hearing about what will unfold in a few minutes when it comes to the fate of Derek Chauvin. And after the sentencing, we are expected to hear from a number of people, including Attorney General Keith Ellison and Benjamin Crump, who has been the attorney representing George Floyd's family.
Yeah, that's right. Regardless of what the sentence is that is handed down in a few minutes, we do know that there's a couple of things planned that we want to make people aware of. There's going to be a march and a rally, regardless of what the sentence ends up being, and that's going to be organized by families supporting families against police brutality. That's happening at 4 o'clock this afternoon, so be aware of that if you're in the downtown area. Also, before that, and just a few minutes after the sentencing wraps up, as you mentioned, we will hear from Attorney General Keith Ellison and also Attorney Ben Crump with the family. Also, Reverend Al Sharpton is in town. He will be making some comments, leading the community in some prayer after the sentencing wraps up. So a couple of things to look for as this afternoon unfolds. I also want to share with you that as we've been watching this sentencing proceeding, I've been in communication with juror number 52. You'll recall Brandon Mitchell. He was the first jury member to speak out after the verdicts were handed down, and he told me that he trusts that Judge Cahill will do a great job deciding on the sentence. So obviously a lot of people around the globe, the jury members in this case, watching closely to see what this sentence will ultimately be.
And Leah, you were watching some of those victim impact statements. Anything that really took you by surprise? I was surprised to hear from Derek Chauvin, although he was very limited in what he said due to his impending federal trial. But hearing from his mom, and I think Eric Nelson making the statement, there's nothing like a mother's bond to her child. And I think that that was well displayed.
Yes, I think that resonates with a lot of mothers, right? We were surprised to hear from her, and you know, having done this for a long time, not only with this trial, but through our careers, both for UTEM and BC, I know that interviewing mothers that might be in somewhat of a similar position, I, for one, have never met a mother who doesn't believe in her son's innocence. So some of her comments, while not surprising, showing her support to her son in such a public way in this high-profile case, I'm sure was very emotional for the entire family. So that definitely was riveting to watch. And I know just watching on social media, people's reaction to her words are very, very powerful. Also to hear from George Floyd's 7-year-old daughter in that video. I mean, that is very powerful, and I'm sure pulling at a lot of heartstrings in that courtroom.
All right, Leah, thank you so much for your analysis as well on this what has been like a long ordeal.
This has been going on now for more than a year, and of course the trial lasted 2.5, 3 weeks, and we're giving you a live look inside of the courtroom right now. We are expecting Judge Peter Cahill to come back into the chambers here at any moment, where he will pronounce the sentence for Derek Chauvin. And of course, his defense attorney, Eric Nelson, has been arguing for probation and time already served, based upon the fact that his argument is that he has been a police officer for 19 years, has no prior criminal record, and has been an upstanding member of the community, and argued before the judge here moments ago that in 2/3 of all second-degree murder sentences that have come down, they have abided by essentially the legislative recommended sentencing guidelines. In this case, between 10.5 and 15 years. The prosecution, they've asked for a lot more and made the argument today that based upon aggravating circumstances that they should go well beyond, in fact, double the recommended sentence and up to 30 years in prison. A lot of legal experts have been saying all along that the judge is probably going to land maybe between 20 and 25 years. But Lee Hutton, who was just with us a few moments ago, believes that after listening to the arguments today in court, that he may go for the full 30 years in prison.
And right now you're taking a live look outside the Government Center in downtown Minneapolis, the Hennepin County Government Center. And you can see people there gathering, everyone awaiting the judge's decision. George Floyd's death, this case has garnered worldwide attention and sparking a movement toward racial justice. And again, we are a little bit over that 15-minute break. Court proceedings began this afternoon at around right on the dot at 1:30. We first heard from George Floyd's daughter, 7-year-old Gianna. She spoke to how she misses her father, and says though also that she still feels like he's here with her in spirit. And the court also hearing from 2 of George Floyd's brothers as well as a nephew, and they really just spoke to how difficult it has been for them over the past year. Philonis Floyd saying that, you know, he was a truck driver when this all happened, and now his life has changed dramatically from sleepless nights, and then also being an ambassador for change, speaking to the President of the United States about changes in law enforcement, speaking to the United Nations, and he's just hoping, like all of George Floyd's family, they're hoping for the maximum here in this case as we await the sentencing decision.
One thing that struck me about Philonis Floyd is the man that we've gotten to know over the past year has been so incredibly well-spoken. His words chosen very carefully and very measured. And today he got up there before the judge, constantly wiping the tears away from his eyes, and you could tell that he was struggling for the right words to say. But the words he did have were very impactful. And he told the judge that I haven't had a real night's sleep thinking of my brother George begging for his life. For an entire year, he told the judge, I've had to live watching the replay of my brother being murdered. And they were strong, impactful words from a brother who obviously dearly misses his brother. And you could hear a pin drop in the courtroom as both he and his other brother were talking about George.
Yeah, and the court also hearing from Carolyn Palenti. She is the mother of Derek Chauvin, and she said that she spoke on behalf of the entire family, and quite honestly, this was her first time speaking publicly. She described this being a difficult time, saying that to hear what she sees and hears through the media and by the prosecution, she says he's been described as heartless, and that's far from the truth. She went on to say, "My son is a good man. He's not racist. Derek is quiet, thoughtful, honorable, and a selfless man. He has a big heart and has put others before himself." And we see that Judge Peter Cahill is taking the seat right now. Let's listen in.
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank everybody for being here and for providing the input you did. Not just the people who were in the courtroom here, but also those who provided written statements, both from the Floyd family and the defendant's family. I've read all the impact statements that were submitted earlier and listened carefully to all the input here today. And it is truly appreciated that you took the time to stay with this case and to provide me with input. I have reviewed the pre-sentence investigation and carefully considered all the facts of the case and the law, but my comments are actually going to be very brief because most of it's going to be in writing. I have a 22-page memorandum that is going to be attached to the sentencing order. And why am I doing it in writing? To emphasize the fact that determining the appropriate sentence in any case, and in this case, is a legal analysis. It's applying the rule of law to the facts of an individual and specific case. And that is why, as opposed to trying to being profound here on the record, I prefer that you read the legal analysis that explains how I determined the sentence in this case. What the case is, or what the sentence is not based on, is emotion or sympathy. But at the same time, I want to acknowledge the deep and tremendous pain that all the families are feeling, especially the Floyd family. You have our sympathies. And I acknowledge and hear the pain that you are feeling. I acknowledge the pain not only of those in this courtroom, but the Floyd family who are outside this courtroom and other members of the community. It has been painful throughout Hennepin County, throughout the state of Minnesota, and even the country. But most importantly, we need to recognize the pain of the Floyd family. I'm not going to attempt to be profound or clever, because it's not the appropriate time. I'm not basing my sentence also on public opinion. I'm not basing it on any attempt to send any messages. A trial court judge, the job of a trial court judge is to apply the law to specific facts and to deal with individual cases. And so, Mr. Shovin, as to count one, based on the verdict of the jury finding you guilty of unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony under Minnesota Statute 609.19 subdivision 2 paren 1, it is the judgment of the court that you now stand convicted of that offense. Pursuant to Minnesota Statute section 609.04, counts 2 and 3 will remain unadjudicated as they are lesser offenses of count 1. As sentenced for count 1, the court commits you to the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections for a period of 270 months. That's 270. That is a 10-year addition to the presumptive sentence of 150 months. This is based on your abuse of a position of trust and authority, and also the particular cruelty shown to George Floyd. You are granted credit for 199 days already served. Pay the mandatory surcharge of $78 to be paid from prison wages. You're prohibited from possessing firearms, ammunition, or explosives for the remainder of your life. Provide a DNA sample as required by law. Register as a predatory offender as required by law. And you will receive a copy of the order and also the attached memorandum explaining the court's analysis. Anything further from the state?
If this needs to be said, we just ask that it be executed forthwith.
Defendant is remanded to the custody of the sheriff to be transported back to the DOC or whichever custody is currently holding him. Anything from the defense? No, Your Honor. All right. Thank you. We are adjourned.
And there you have it. Derek Chauvin sentenced to 270 months with the Department of Corrections. That equals out to 22.5 years, and that will include time already served while this trial has been underway.
Yeah, we have heard from quite a few people this afternoon, including Derek Chauvin's mom, as well as relatives, 2 brothers and nephew from George Floyd, as well as his 7-year-old daughter, Gianna. They all spoke to the difficulties of what they've dealt with this past year. But as you said, as the judge said, Chauvin now facing, or will serve over 20 years behind bars. We know that the prosecution was asking for 30, and the family was asking for the maximum penalty, but under state law, it could have been a whole lot less.
It could have been. We want to bring in Lee Hutton, our legal analysis analyst, who's been with us throughout the entire trial here, Lee, and give us your reaction to this. 22.5 years.
22.5 years. I really think, based on the video, that this was lesser than what I thought it would be. I'm curious to read the order, this legal analysis that the judge alluded to, which I think was the right approach. I think this is not the time for something profound. This is not the time for some type of narrative that takes away from the seriousness of this case. So I plan on downloading the order and taking a look to see what the judge was thinking and what he thought was the important factors to not give the 30 years that was requested by the prosecution.
And it sounds like, Lee, that the judge had his mind made up because he had has a 22-page memorandum. He said he was going to keep it brief with his comments because he had so much in documentation. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, and that goes to some of the dialogue we had right before the sentencing, that the judge did his research. He took a meticulous approach in trying to determine what he felt was the appropriate sentencing. And this is how I break it down, is that he had the standard sentencing guidelines to go through, which is 12 years, and basically pretty much doubled that with time served, which is a normal application of the law. So the judge, in his thinking, was, I'm going to double the normal standard. But again, this case was so unique, so impactful to the world, and those 4 factors that judges usually consider, I think there were some arguments that the prosecution made that fit right into those factual narratives.
Okay, our cameras right now are outside of the crowd gathering around the Hennepin County Justice Center right now, the government center. Lee, let's talk more about the judge's verdict here. A 22-page memorandum where he's basically going to parse out his sentence in according to what his interpretation of the law is. How often do we see that from judges?
Very rare, not something where it's 22 pages, but again, this is a very serious murder charge and conviction that he's doing. He understands that there's going to be an appeal process because the defense has said they were going to do that. And honestly, I think it's appropriate for both sides to have some type of reason in writing that they can refer to, set it down, revisit it, and understand exactly what the judge was thinking. Now, the judge certainly said, I did this without emotion, without consideration of what the community was reaction, and we'll have to wait and see, as I look at the video to the left of my screen, how individuals in the community seem to accept or reject the judge's sentencing.
Yeah, only time will tell. That will be very
That's
interesting.
right.
Lee, please stand by. We want to check in now with Fox 9's Paul Bloom, who is live in the media center just outside of the government center there, Paul. And any reaction yet from the crowds out there?
Well, as you heard in that initial video, as you started showing our cameras, we are across the street from the plaza, so not very far. So I am certainly within earshot. And we did seemingly hear some, certainly some sounds, some noises. I'm going to say it's of frustration. I think this sentence will not be received well in some corners. I think the state had asked for 30 years. The family pleaded with Judge Cahill during victim impact statements to max it out at the 30 years. Yes, the statute calls all the way up to 40, but in most people believe we were really targeting 30 as the highest end that Derek Chauvin could be looking at. And today, Judge Cahill coming in at 22 and a half years. I've covered, trials, and we've done a murder 2 case. I had one kind of in the back of my head today coming into this. It was a high-profile case years ago. Jeffrey Trevino, it was a domestic homicide. He killed his wife, hid the body in the Mississippi River. He ended up murder 2, unintentional, no criminal history. Aggravating factors there. That judge went up to 27 and a half years. I was predicting we'd be in that 25 to 30 year time frame for Derek Chauvin. Clearly that is not what happened. I do find it fascinating that the judge here is going to basically put his feelings, his findings in this 22-page memorandum, given that he didn't want to sit up on that soapbox today. He knows the world is watching. He knows the cameras are rolling. He allowed it. I actually thought Judge Cahill, if you were to ask me my opinion, ran kind of a tight ship of a court case here. He did the trial. The convictions came in, and Judge Cahill today says this wasn't about sending a message. He didn't want to get all emotional. He clearly did his research. He listened to both sides' arguments, and he came out at that 270 months. A couple quick thoughts I have as you guys discussed the 270 months. Remember, in Minnesota, 2/3 of that time is served behind bars. The rest of that typically, as long as there's good behavior, somebody gets to go home, or halfway houses get out from prison confinement. So you're talking 14, 15 years behind bars. The final 7 or so, I haven't done the full math calculations, but you are looking at that type of time frame. What awaits Derek Chauvin now? Who knows? He has been housed in our state's maximum security prison at Oak Park Heights, a very difficult type of inmate when you think about it. He is a police officer, incredibly the most public of cases and the most horrific of incidents on the streets of South Minneapolis, outside 38th and Chicago. So no doubt he will be sort of a marked man in prison. Does he spend the rest of the sentence in isolation? We don't know what awaits him, but clearly he is off to prison. 22 and a half years, 270 months. We'll have to see where the reaction comes in. We're awaiting word from Attorney General Keith Ellison, of course, the Floyd family, and talking and thinking about what Keith Ellison, the prosecution's office, might say today. Remember, Keith Ellison said after the conviction he was not out for revenge here. He basically said in his public comments he wants this case sentenced like a murder 2 case with aggravating factors, and he put that basically forward today. You heard Matthew Frank, his, of course, deputy in the Attorney General's office, asking to go all the way up to 30 years, that this was not your typical murder 2 crime. And basically, Judge Cahill has fallen somewhere in between, right? That presumed sentence for no one with a criminal record, with someone with a criminal record, is 12 and a half years. The state asked for 30. Judge Cahill coming in at 22 and a half. So we'll await some reaction. We do know that we expect some rallies to be descending down upon the courthouse. They were targeting 4 o'clock, so we're getting close to expecting to see some crowds down here. But again, my gut reaction today is that in parts of this community, 22 and a half years will not meet sort of justice demands that some in the community had asked for.
And Paul, you raised a great point there, because I think most people are confused by sentences, no matter what state that you're in, but most people do not serve out the full terms. 2/3 is what's accepted here in Minnesota is your release date for probation. And under this sentence here today, Derek Chauvin would be out and on probation in just under 15 years of his time in prison, if this holds up upon appeal.
Exactly. We do go to the appeals process. Also, just don't forget, I mean, the story moves so quickly, right? Minutes before Judge Cahill issued his sentencing order, the defendant, Derek Chauvin, hinted at some sort of new information that might put the Floyd family at ease. I heard you guys speculating, was that a suggestion that he was going to allocute on the federal side? He does face prison time there. How that would coincide with his state prison time, that is to be determined. But today, Judge Cahill said at least in state court for murder 2, 270 months, 22 and a half years. And as you just mentioned, Tim, looking at, in terms of time behind bars, just shy of 15 years for the murder, the 9.5 minutes, knee on a neck, George Floyd. Basically a deadly arrest that really changed and rocked the world when it comes to social justice, police brutality, and other issues.
And Paul, when it comes to those federal charges that Chauvin is facing for violating George Floyd's civil rights, can you at all speak to how that will play in the future? What does that look like?
You know, it's interesting, BC. I know we'll have Leon after me, and I want to just say I've asked a lot of legal experts about this, and I don't really get a clear answer as it relates to what the prison term in federal court. Should he be convicted? Remember, he's presumed innocent at this point, of course. If he's convicted in federal court, how that sentencing might work in relation to the state court. You know, there was some talk early on that there was going to be this global plea deal where he'd be sentenced in both cases, maybe giving him control over where he would spend his prison days. I know my understanding, at least early on, was he wanted to do that in federal prison. I just, frankly, I don't have a great answer for our viewers today. It is just basically a situation that is going to play out. I know we've used the word unprecedented, unique over and over when it comes to this case, but it truly is. And the fact that it's playing out on 2 tracks right now is a little bit complicated and a little bit murky as it relates to what's in store. But for now, what we do know clearly, 270 months. His prison sentence starts today. Judge Cahill giving him some credit, but at least in state court at this moment, this afternoon, Friday, June 25th, we are talking about a 22 and a half year prison sentence facing Derek Chauvin. All right, Paul, that's a good segue to bring Lee Hutton back into the conversation here because, Lee, we do have that overarching federal trial now that's going to be coming up soon with Derek Chauvin, where the federal charges are he was indicted by a federal grand jury for violating George Floyd's right to be free from unreasonable seizure and use of force. How does that play out now? If he, and I underscore if he is found guilty of those civil rights violations, then does he become a ward of the federal prison system? Does that supersede state prison?
It can, and there's a lot of things that could happen, including this global agreement that Paul Bloom alluded to, and maybe that is foreshadowing what he told the family, like, wait and see. There's a lot of opportunities to resolve this case. It may even be that he worked a deal out that he's testifying against the other officers, and therefore it's going to make a conviction on those other officers very easy. So we have to wait and see, but there's a lot of different elements here, including the fact that while the state guidelines in Minnesota does not include death penalty or anything of that, but the federal court does, even though if it was in Minnesota. I don't think this is a death penalty case, but I only say that to emphasize that there are 2 different, separate, distinct opportunities for sentencing, and they will be treated differently.
And we've got the trial for the other officers coming up. You have former officers J. Alexander King, Thomas Lane, Tu Tao. That case has now been pushed back until March of next year, in large part because Judge Cahill wanted the federal proceedings to get out of the way first. Correct?
That is correct, and I think that was a smart move because, number one, the federal court, while it deals with some of the same charges, there's the added civil rights violation that is unique to the federal district court, and to have that adjudicated or finalized, and then we have something what we call in the law res judicata or issue preclusion, meaning that if you try an issue in a court of competent jurisdiction and it rises out of the same facts facts and occurrence, there's no need to try those set of facts again. So you'll see motions in state court after the federal court is adjudicated that we don't need to try this again. We can accept the fact that liability or a conviction was made and only deal with the sentencing part of the case. So I think that was an appropriate move by Judge Cahill.
And Lee, can you at all speak to an appeal? Is that still an option here? I mean, we know now that Chauvin has been sentenced. I know they had tried to have this all overturned earlier, but the judge making a decision hours ago that that's not going to happen, and he proceeded with the sentencing. But is an appeal, is that a real possibility right now?
So the appeal is a possibility. He has 90 days from the order that was filed. And as we're sitting here, I've been able to get the judge's order. And so it's already been filed and out. So there's 90-day timeline for him to request the appeal. And then after that, the Court of Appeals sets dates for preparing briefs and then arguments. And so that's a pretty long process. However, if there in fact is this global deal or some type of plea in the federal district court, then your ability to appeal is voided out because you agreed to or stipulated to a certain plea or term. So we have to wait and see if the foreshadowing of Chauvin's statements is that for the family, I'm not going to take you through another trial. I'm going to agree to the conviction and then get a sentence appropriately from that standpoint.
Yeah, in fact, what Derek said to the judge is, I want to give my condolences to the Floyd family. There is going to be some other information in the future that I hope will give them some peace of mind. All right, here is Attorney General Keith Ellison.
Hello, everyone. My name is Keith Ellison. I'm the Attorney General for the state of Minnesota. And on behalf of the prosecution team, we want to thank the Floyd family, Brandon Williams, Terrence Floyd, Philanese Floyd, and Gigi, who offered their testimony to the court and gave their heartfelt feelings about the impact of this horrific crime on their family. We heard for the first time from George Floyd's 6-year-old daughter. What a delightful, beautiful child. And my heart really is with the entire Floyd family as they figure out how to explain to her what happened as she grows up. The sentence that the court just imposed on Derek Chauvin, 270 months or 22.5 years, is one of the longest a former police officer has ever received for an unlawful use of deadly force. Like the conviction of Derek Chauvin 2 months ago, today's sentencing is not justice, but it is another moment of real accountability on the road to justice. It's difficult to see anyone lose their freedom, but seeing somebody lose their life through torture over 9.5 minutes is incomparably worse. Those minutes and seconds are inerasably seared into the minds of people across the world who watched George Floyd die. Above all, the heroic people who stopped and bore witness to George Floyd's suffering and torture, who came forward a year later to testify about what they saw, and to the Floyd family members themselves and their counsel, Ben Crump, Tony Romanucci, we say thank you. The lives of everyone who saw what happened to George Floyd are forever changed. My hope for Derek Chauvin is that he uses his long sentence to reflect on the choices that he made on May 25th, 2020. My hope is that he will find it within himself to acknowledge the impact of his choices on George Floyd, his family, his fellow police officers, and the world. My hope is that he takes the time to learn something about the man whose life he took and about the movement that rose up to call for justice in the wake of George Floyd's torture and death. Today is also an important moment for our country. The outcome of this case is critically important, but by itself, it's not enough. My hope for our country is that this moment gives us pause and allows us to rededicate ourselves to the real societal change that will move us much further along the road to justice. I'm not talking about the kind of change that takes decades. I'm talking about real change, concrete change that real people can do now. I'm talking to lawmakers. At this historic moment, there is so much legislation around the country, in city councils, county boards, state legislatures, and Congress, that is still waiting to be passed. If these bills were passed, they would make the deaths at the hands of law enforcement officers less likely, would improve police community relations, would restore trust and therefore cooperation, improve the lives of officers who want to protect and serve, and make everyone safer. Every one of these bills at every level of government is critical for helping our families, our law enforcement officers, communities, and the country heal. Above all, Congress has still not passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. I call on leaders and members of Congress to pass the best and strongest version of this bill that can be passed, and to pass it now. President Biden speaking now to law enforcement leaders. At this historic moment, law enforcement leaders are in a position to finally put in place policy, training, mechanisms, and accountability that can build a police department that people can really trust and rely on. And the elected leaders that they answer to must support and empower these law enforcement leaders to do it. Where there is distrust between community and police, there is less cooperation between. Where violent crime is spiking across the nation in major cities, we simply cannot afford the distrust. The schism leaves us all a little less safe. But trust and cooperation must be earned. You cannot clean a dirty wound. By bringing accountability in law enforcement, you actually promote public safety. I say to those law enforcement leaders, make no mistake, this is something your officers are asking for. In the aftermath of George Floyd's death, 14 Minneapolis Police Department officers signed an open letter condemning Derek Chauvin's actions and embracing the call for reform and change. These 14 officers don't only speak for themselves, they speak for hundreds across the country. These officers and ones like them want you to support officers who treat everyone with dignity and respect. They want you to support officers who are taking risks to speak up and demand that we do better. They want you to hold their colleagues accountable who refuse to serve communities with dignity and respect. Why do officers want accountability? Well, think of the 9-year-old girl wearing a t-shirt that said love across the front, who witnessed George Floyd's murder, and how she will feel 20 years from now as she may be speaking to her own children about whether to trust law enforcement. The damage that Derek Floyd's crime inflicted upon the reputation of officers is undermining the ability for people to trust, and that is very tragic. It's not fair to judge all police officers by Derek Chauvin's actions, but some people inevitably will generalize unless there is true accountability. You just can't heal a dirty wound, and when there's little trust, sadly, there's little safety. When law enforcement leaders take clear steps to build in accountability and prioritize wellness for their officers, they will have the officers' respect, trust between officers and the people they are dedicated to protecting and serving. Let me speak to prosecutors. We believe, and we state and declare, that no one is above the law and no one is beneath it. A police officer is not above the law, and George Floyd certainly is not beneath the law. When, after a thorough review, prosecutors believe that they have probable cause that anyone, including someone operating with the authority of law and law enforcement, has violated the law, Our prosecutors must be vigorous, visible, and swift. I'm speaking to community now. We need every community member to continue the call for real reform and meaningful change. Peacefully, constructively, but clearly. This is a moment for change, and your call for it is making it happen. This means everyone who wants to live in a society with dignity and respect as core values, everyone who wants to be safe in their homes and on the street, everyone who wants to get the help that they need, everyone who wants their loved ones to get home safely. This is what we need to do. What will happen if we don't do it? We will slip deeper into a century-long cycle of inaction. We can and we must make another choice. The choice to break the old paradigm and end the cycle of inaction. The choice to act for accountability and justice. The choice to transform ourselves and our country. For the sake of all the lives that have been lost, for the sake of the terrible sacrifices that too many families like the Floyds have had to make, and for the sake of the many officers who strive to serve and protect with dignity and honor and high standards, and for the sake of the community. Time is up. It's time to act. We're counting on you. We're counting on each other. Finally, I want to thank this extraordinary team of prosecutors. It has been my deepest honor to work with you. You all are the best, and I'm honored to be your colleague. I want to send another strong signal of love and friendship to the Floyd family, who have done so much to uphold the dignity of our community. I want to thank the Hennepin County Attorney's Office and Mike Freeman, who have been side by side with us and have done such a good job, and we appreciate their work. And I want to thank the witnesses who courageously stepped forward for George Floyd on May 25th at risk to themselves and came back a year later to testify about what they saw. And lastly, I want to thank the community for making the call for justice. That's it. Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us for our live special coverage of Derek Chauvin's sentencing. Right now, you just heard from Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison speaking out just moments after the judge handed down his sentence. Keith Ellison saying this is one of the longest sentences that an officer has received. Today's sentencing is not justice, but it's accountability on the road of justice. And he said that, you know, he hopes that Derek Chauvin uses this time to reflect on his actions. And Ellison went on to say that this is an important moment for our country. It allows us to rededicate ourselves to real change. And he actually called on Congress, because there has been no movement so far on any sort of police reform bills.
Especially the police reform bill that is named in honor of George Floyd. And you may have heard a subtle passage there and a subtle tipping of his hat to the Hennepin County Attorney's Office there, and very significant here, because you may remember that originally the Hennepin County Attorney's Office was in charge of this case, and it was Mike Freeman who ultimately made the decision to turn it over to the Attorney General's Office. And Keith Ellison thanking them for working side by side, but it was really the Attorney General's Office that took the lead almost a year ago, and eventually was successful with this case in court. And it's led for a call across the state to have these kind of cases that involve police officers to now be turned over to the Attorney General's office for prosecution from now on, just so to take impartiality out of the county attorney's office and turn it over to the state.
And we are hearing from a lot of people. We just heard from Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. We're expected to hear from Benjamin Crump and Al Sharpton. Benjamin Crump, the attorney for George Floyd's family. But shortly after, or a little bit before Ellison took the podium, the family of George Floyd, his sister Bridget Floyd, she is the founder of the George Floyd Memorial Foundation, and she released a statement saying the sentence handed down today to the Minneapolis police officer who killed my brother George Floyd shows that matters of police brutality are finally being taken seriously. However, we have a long way to go and many changes to make before Black and brown people finally feel like they are being treated fairly and humanely by law enforcement in this country.
We want to take it back now to Lee Hutton, who's been standing by with us. He's been our legal analyst all along now. And Lee, have you had a chance to look over the 22-page order from Judge Cahill to kind of give us an executive summary of what was his legal reasoning for this today?
Well, not a full, I haven't gotten through all 22 pages, but it definitely looks like the judge is considering factors that the prosecution brought up, and then the fact that the defense brought up some mitigating factors. And he starts, let me see, I don't know what I did with the order, but I had it with me in my hands. But certainly the judge is doing this as a guideline if there was an appeal, because not only can you appeal the sentencing or the conviction, but you can also appeal the sentencing at Court of Appeals. So if the conviction doesn't get overturned, certainly the defense can say, well, the 22 and a half years was a little bit too much, and this is why the mitigating factors should apply. And the judge gives like a roadmap from what I see. I haven't gotten to the end yet, but he's been very straightforward on kind of what he's thinking and kind of the severity of the crime.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And Lee, we just heard from Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, and behind him, you know, his team of prosecutors who were there and spent countless hours building their case against Derek Chauvin. As a trial attorney, can you kind of get us inside their heads? This is the end for them now.
Yeah, this is the end. Certainly all the hard work, and can you imagine that this incident impacted the world on May 25th, 2020, when everyone was at home due to COVID. We had some time to self-reflect within ourselves, our own character, and the character of others, and hopefully as we walked out of those doors, when we come back as people, we're a better person. And all of a sudden, this impacted our beliefs. There's some people who just refuse to believe that police brutality was ever a consequence, and a consequence to people of color. And then this video comes out, and
Lee, pardon me, we're going to interrupt you here for a moment because we are about to hear now from the Floyd family, and I believe Reverend Al Sharpton is going to kick it all off for us here. Let's join in on their thoughts.
And right now we're just kind of in a waiting period. You can see the Reverend Al Sharpton there. He's expected to speak. We see Philonise Floyd, that's George Floyd's brother, as well as other family attorneys.
Ben Crump is going to have his entire team there, along with his fellow attorney Antonio Romanucci.
All right, let's listen in.
We are going to hear from Reverend Al Sharpton, who will start us in prayer, followed by the legal team, Attorney Ben Crump, Attorney Antonio Romanucci, Jeff Storms, Chris Stewart. And then we will hear from a few members of the family. If you could please hold your questions, let them get through what they need to say. Thank you so much.
As we prepare to pray, family of Jacob Blake is with us, and the family of Dante Wright is with us. This verdict and this sentencing is the longest sentence we've seen, but it is not justice, because George Floyd is in a grave tonight, even though Chauvin will be in jail. So let us not feel that we're here to celebrate, because justice would have been George Floyd never have been killed. Justice would have been the maximum. We got more than we thought, only because we have been disappointed so many times before. 22 and a half years is longer than we've ever got, but shorter than what we should have gotten in the past. Let us remember, a man lost his life. This is not a prayer of celebration. It's a prayer to thank God for giving the strength to this family and those activists that stayed in the streets to make sure this court had to do what was right. Let me repeat for those in the back, because those are the ones that march, that this is the longest sentence they've ever given, but it is not justice. Justice is George Floyd would be alive. Amen. Justice is that they would have been doing this. Had they done sentences like this before, maybe Chauvin would not have thought he would have gotten away with it. That's right. So let us remember the people that you castigated and attacked that marched in Minneapolis and that we marched all over this country that wouldn't stop. And we're not going to stop. One sentence does not solve a criminal justice problem. The United States Senate must show the same courage this jury showed and hold police accountable for murder and make them pay in the court of law maximum for murder. Not a token, not a donation, but full accountability for the actions that you did. Let us pray. Dear God, we come to the same spot we bowed at the beginning of the trial. We bowed at the beginning of the trial, asking you to give this family strength and give them grace. And you brought us now to the end of this particular proceeding. They will say it is more time than any time in history, but we will say that history has been long underserving its citizens. Yes. And we humbly thank you for giving this family the strength to stand where other families didn't even get a court date. Yes. We remember Eric Garner today. Yes. We remember Michael Brown. Yes. We remember Jacob Blake, yes, who is still with us. We remember Tamir Rice on his birthday. 19 years old would have been today. We remember Breonna Taylor. Yes. They never got a court date. Never. We did get a court date, a conviction, and some time. Amen. Some will say that's progress. I will say, as Malcolm X said, if you have a knife in my back 6 inches, to take out 4 inches is progress, but I still have 2 inches of knife in my back. The knife is still in our back as long as these unresolved cases are there. And the Floyd family and those of us in the civil rights will not stop until justice becomes a matter of federal law and no longer a news story, but the story that we know will follow. Touch the U.S. Senate to see that they must make law so that we will not have little children like George's daughter had to give a judge a statement about the value of a daddy, but they understand that all of your children matter. Yes, black lives matter because you made us all. And we'll be careful to be loyal, and we'll be careful to live up to the calling you've placed on the lives of those that serve, and careful to give your name the praise. These blessings we ask in your name. Amen. Amen. Let me bring on now, it's been a long journey, and this is not the end. This is just one stop on the highway toward full justice. None has been more courageous. None has been more consistent. One has not been more unselfish than the Attorney General of Black America, who has stood with this family from day one, came even when the cameras weren't there, and has stayed with the family and other families. Let us bring, before we bring members of the family, Attorney Ben Crump.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Reverend Al Sharpton, for leading this family and this country in prayer as we continue to struggle to make the words of liberty and justice for all real in America. I stand here with a great legal team standing firmly with the family of George Floyd. That is Attorney Chris Stewart and Attorney Justin Miller from Atlanta, Georgia, Attorney Tony Romanucci from Chicago, Illinois, and Attorney Jeff Storms from right here in Minneapolis. And at present, we have the brothers of George Floyd, Philonise Floyd, Terrence Floyd, and Rodney Floyd, as well as Brandon Williams. We have his cousins, Sharita Tate and Tara Brown. And we know at home praying. We have his sisters, Bridget Floyd, Jaja Floyd, and Latanya Floyd, and certainly his beautiful daughter, Chris tells me, is looking, smiling, saying that her daddy changed the world, and he will talk more about that later. And we want to acknowledge all his family. We want to acknowledge all of the people who use their voice to say his name. Say his name. Say his name. Say his name. Today represents an opportunity to be a turning point in America. This is the longest sentence that a police officer has ever been sentenced to in the history of the state of Minnesota. But this should not be the exception when a black person is killed by brutality by police. It should be the norm. And so when we think about real justice would be, Silky, that George Floyd would still be here with his family. So what we got today was some measure of accountability. And we understand that there are still federal charges pending. So as his brothers and his family ask for the maximum, we're still holding out for the maximum.
That's right.
We have to remember real justice in America will be black men and black women and people of color will not have to fear being killed by the police just because the color of their skin. That would be real justice. So we thank most of all the millions of Americans who raised their voice. You all raised your voices, and because you raised your voices, that is why we got the guilty conviction, and that is why we got the longest sentence in the state of Minnesota history. So on behalf of the Floyd family, we want to say thank you to millions of Americans who all said, until we get justice for George Floyd, until we get accountability for George Floyd, none of us can breathe. We can breathe just a little easier today, and we thank you for that.
We got your back. We got your back.
Thank you all. And I will say this. We got accountability on the civil side, thanks to the leadership of the city leaders in Minnesota. We now have gotten some accountability in the criminal level. But we need accountability on the policy level. So we say to the United States Senate, pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act immediately. 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 At this time, I give you one of the finest attorneys in the United States of America. I have had the pleasure of being with a team of lawyers, Reverend Al, who are second to none. And each of them work tirelessly day and night from every corner of America, working on behalf of George Floyd's family. And there is no way we could get to this point where we're at on this journey to justice without all our brothers and sisters, Bhavani Ravindran, Madeline Simmons, Michelle Godot, all of those, Scott Peters, all of them who are working, Scott Madison, they allowed us to come out front to be with the family today, but they are not forgotten. And I know my brother in the bar who just did wonderful things in Louisiana with Alton Sterling, Chris Stewart, appreciates each and every one of the lawyers on our team. At this time, you're going to hear from Attorney Chris Stewart and Attorney Justin Miller.
First, let me start by saying Roxy and Gianna couldn't be here, but right now, Gianna is actually watching. she's watching live. So let me tell you, Gianna, you've done two things in this case. You started by saying, my daddy changed the world.
Yes.
I want you to know you changed the world.
That's hard.
Because today, that statement that you gave was not just powerful, but it was prophetic. You told us that his spirit is still here.
That's right.
And people that are doubting, people that are looking at these monuments coming up and the statues coming up of George Floyd and not understanding, you aren't understanding that his spirit is changing things. It doesn't matter who the man was. It matters who he is now.
Yes.
There are conversations happening between black and white that never would have happened before about policing. There are conversations happening between senators that we are pushing and urging to stand up for what you believe in. If you believe in law and order and change, then you will pass this bill because it protects everyone. Nelson Mandela once said, if you change what you believe depending on who you're talking to, you are not fit to lead.
That's right. Amen.
So we are looking for leadership. We are looking for the spirit of George Floyd, which is in every single person now. We are getting off the sidelines and realizing that if you critique policing, it doesn't mean you hate every cop. It means you want the bad cops gone.
That's right. Yes.
And we only will change things by leaving the sidelines and coming together in the middle, no matter what color you are. And that is the spirit of George Floyd. And yes, Gianna has changed the world. It's been an honor and a privilege standing up for this family. It's just been an honor.
First and foremost, I would like to say to the family, my condolences, my prayers from my family and from everyone in Atlanta, from Scott Masterson, Madeline Simmons, Lewis Brisbois Law Firm, who put in a lot of work to help get us to the point we are today. Thank you to the family. I know that Mr. Chauvin's mother didn't have any words for the family, but we do, and I know you guys do. So to the family, I say my condolences, and I'm sorry, and we love you, because this is what it's about first and foremost, love. Second thing I'll say is this: until things like this are not national news, we haven't made it. We're still in the same place that we were 20 years ago and 30 years ago. We are all here talking about something that everybody sitting right here knew what should have happened.
That's right. Yes.
We knew from day one he murdered George Floyd.
Yes.
We all saw it.
Amen.
But we had to go through this for a year to get to this point where this family can have some modicum, some amount of closure. A year. So I'll say this: until black and brown people in this country can get closure, can depend on the justice system, can know that when someone murders somebody in broad daylight, that they're going to be held accountable, we got a lot of work to do. And I will say to all you people, all you activists, all you people who are fighting from day one, keep working, keep pushing, keep fighting. Keep fighting. Because we have a lot of work to do in Atlanta, Georgia, and in Brookline, Minnesota, Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, I'm sorry, and in New York City, and in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and in North Carolina, and in Los Angeles, California, in Texas and Chicago. We have work to do. So keep pushing. This is a victory, and we're going to celebrate it as a victory. But it's one small step, and we have a lot more to go. So thank you guys for being with us through all of this. Thank you guys for loving this family, and pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. ASAP.
Amen. And now, before we get to the family, some great lawyers from Chicago, Illinois, one of the best civil rights lawyers in America, and a great lawyer who hails right here in Minnesota. I mean, without him giving us the lay of the land, there is no way we would have been able to achieve what we have accomplished. Attorney Antonio Romanucci and Attorney Jeff Storms.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tony Romanucci. What we saw today was the graph intersected, the perfect apex now between civil justice and criminal justice. What we now have today, we have proof that Black lives matter, that they are valuable, and that when you violate policies, you're going to pay, and you're going to pay a lot of money. And when you violate the law, you're going to get prosecuted, and you're going to go to jail, and you're going to go to jail for a long time. And those two lines crossed today, and George Floyd now equals justice on both civil and criminal. But the job isn't over. It's not over until we go state to state. Reverend Al, Ben, you all said it so eloquently. We must have the George Floyd police reforming bill passed.
Amen.
If that doesn't get passed, our justice could fall. The graph could fall. We need justice all over America. We want justice for George Floyd, the Floyd family. We continue to love you. We always will. We'll always be a part of your lives. But there are so many other families that are here today that are also suffering and require that same justice, civil and criminal. That's what matters most. Thank you all.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Not a lot to say that hasn't been said, but as the local Minnesota lawyer, I just want us to remember that we need all of you. We need the media, we need the activists, because the second we turn around and leave, we have to go back and ask ourselves, how do we get more justice for George Floyd? How do we get justice for Dante Wright? How do we get justice for Winston Smith? How do we get justice for the many families here who are regularly fought for on behalf by people like Tashira Garraway and her group, Nakima Levy Armstrong and her group, and without all of you, we don't have the energy for that fight right here. We need you all to keep turning out, and we appreciate it because it's allowed the Floyd family to get the most historic justice we've ever seen, but it's not enough.
Amen.
Thank you.
Not enough.
Don't forget Dalal Eid.
Dalal Eid.
Dalal Eid. And as we get ready to bring up the Floyd family, I would be remiss if Brandon, as we heard the sentence, leaned in and whispered in my ear. I got a text from Breonna Taylor's mother congratulating us on getting some justice, the justice that she never got. That's right. And I have to tell you, Reverend Al, as Derek Chauvin's mother was standing up there making her comments, I thought of Tamika Palmer, Breonna Taylor's mother. And so it's not enough until we get justice for all of our people who have been killed unjustly. I think Breonna Taylor's with us. Right now, we're going to have you hear from some of the Floyd family members. You've come to know him. He has been speaking at the U.S. Congress, to the United Nations and everywhere, saying that we demand justice for my big brother George Floyd. He sounds like a politician, Reverend Al. Mr. Philonis Floyd.
Got my vote.
Keep right.
I got a lot of emotions going through my head right now, but I just find it profound that I felt that I begged for justice for my brother, some type of accountability. The treatment that I thought that everybody should receive, it's just life, you know. You can't get that back. We all live together in this world, and we all want to be able to work together in this world. You have good police officers and you have bad ones. The fact that you shouldn't have to sort them out. The community that I grew up in, it was a lot of African American people. But the fact that Minnesota has a greater amount of Caucasian people, I still think that everybody should be the same. Everybody should be neutral. Everybody should want to make a difference and make sure that people, when they come to Minnesota, they don't think about George Floyd. They should be able to think about how great Minnesota is. Not thinking about Philando Castile, you know. His mother is still fighting. Thinking about Dante Wright. Many families I had to console. You think about Anthony McClain, he was killed. All of these people were shot in the back, most of them. The fact that I'm here and I'm still standing, and over a year later, I'm still speaking and I'm speaking out. Times are hard. I have a family, we wake up every day and we don't see my brother. Empty seats all around the house he would have been in. The fact that Gianna will grow up knowing that her father had made a difference in the world, but the fact that she cannot have a sweet 16. She cannot have him walk her down the aisle. She would not be able to have prom with the daddy dance. This is not something realistic. This is something, it's like a dream, but we all need to stand up for what is right.
All right.
All these activists and all these advocates, I thank you all. Definitely I thank you all. Because if you all didn't speak out, we wouldn't have had a lot of help. But the fact that the world, you got to think about Japan. You have to think about Germany. You have to think United Nations. You have to think Italy. I have so many different people I spoke to, Africa, all around the world, and they all think the same way. Your skin color should not define who you are.
Amen.
It should never be a weapon. And the fact that we're here standing today, still breathing, we're still fighting. Reverend Al always said, keep fighting.
Keep fighting.
And that's something I can't stop. I want to tell Miss Carr, I love you.
Yeah.
I know it's hard. That's Eric Garner's mom. I want to tell Breonna Taylor, mom, I love you. Pamela Turner, I know it's hard. I want to tell Pamela Turner, that's Baytown, Texas.
Yeah.
This is not okay. Her daughter is walking around, and I know she's in tears every day thinking about her mother. Her mother was killed in point blank range, shot multiple times. So many different people all around the world who didn't even have this type of technology. I just want to reiterate, not just Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. We need to stand up and fight. Can't get comfortable, because when you get comfortable, people forget about you.
Amen.
So the legend will still live on. George is not here, but his spirit lives here. Breonna Taylor is not here, but the spirit still lives here. Eric Garner is not here, spirit still right here. But the fact that we're here fighting, I want all you all to stand up and fight. Thank you all so much.
And next we're going to have another brother of George who came all the way from New York. Brooklyn, New York.
In the house.
And as we introduce him, it's not lost on us as Attorney Stewart and Attorney Romanucci and I talk. It's always a journey to justice. Tony told me Laquan McDonough, who was found guilty, his killer, the police officer that killed him, shot him 14 times in the back on video. 16 times in the back on video. And he was convicted of second-degree murder, and he was only sentenced to 6 years. Botham Jones, who in Dallas, Texas, was killed in his own apartment.
Right.
The white policewoman Amber Geiger was found guilty of first-degree murder, Reverend Al,
Right.
and she was only sentenced to 10 years. And Justin Miller, where was it, Walter Scott in South Carolina, same conviction, shot in the back, on video, convicted 20 years. So each step, each case, we keep making progress. We came too far to stop now. We have to keep going forward. And so that's why all the energy we have in this courtroom, we have to take to Capitol Hill, and we have to join Senator Cory Booker. We have to join Congresswoman Karen Bass, Senator Tim Scott. We got to say, you all, we need meaningful police reform.
That's right.
So we don't have to put up with these injustices. Seem like, Reverend Al, every other week there's a new hashtag. We can stop this, America. We're at the turning point. Terrence Floyd, Brooklyn, New York.
Let me hear y'all say change.
Change.
Let me hear y'all say change.
Change.
That's right. Just like I heard y'all say change all together, that's how we're going to keep the change going together. Fight, keep fighting. The way we got here is because of our fight and your fight together. Y'all hit the streets, we thankful for y'all, and we just, I'm overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed, because I'm going to tell you a quick story. I had a dream the other night. I was in a field. I was in a field in the South with my family. And I looked back and I saw a man coming up, walking, and I'm trying to figure out who is that? I look, he gets closer, and all of a sudden I see the hat cocked to the side like this. Anybody that know me know who that is. That's my father. So he got close to me, and he gave me a smile, and he gave me a hug. I woke up, that dream was so real, I woke up hugging myself. So I knew, I was a little leery about the sentencing, but because of that, I knew that my father was saying, you good, he's good. Keep doing what you're doing. For me, for your brother, for your name. Because we Floyd strong, and we're gonna stay strong. Thank you.
Right. Well said. Thank you, Terrence. Next, we will hear from the nephew of George Floyd, who's like a brother, like a son in many regards to him, Brandon Williams.
Yeah.
It's funny that we got justice, but not enough justice. You know, I remember standing here the first day of trial in this very same spot, and we were very optimistic and unsure of what was going to happen. After seeing that video, we should have been 100% sure that we would be at a guilty conviction with a maximum sentence. When you think about George being murdered in cold blood with a knee on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, execution style in broad daylight, 22 and a half years is not enough. We were served a life sentence. We can't get George back. Gianna can't hug George again. He'll be able to hug his family possibly and see his family again. We can't get George back. So in retrospect, I feel that he should have received a life sentence as well. What kind of message are you sending to our country? What kind of message are you sending to the younger kids like Gianna? That you can kill a man in cold blood and get a slap on the wrist? That's like a slap in the face to all of us standing up here. And everybody around the world who feel what we feel and saw that video. So I won't celebrate this. I won't celebrate it at all. But I will celebrate a guilty conviction on a police officer that killed a black man, because far too many times we see them kill us and get right away with it. I will celebrate this as a victory for Ms. Tamika Palmer, who I'm very, very close with. I hope that Attorney Daniel Cameron out in Kentucky can follow Keith Edison's lead and charge the cops who killed Breonna Taylor. So there are some positive things to take from this, but this 22 and a half years just isn't one for me. Thank you.
All right, Brandon. From the heart, Brandon. And we have his brother, his baby brother, Rodney Floyd from Houston, Texas, 3rd Ward.
Hey, how y'all doing? You know, I would like to thank the protesters first, the local protesters. And in this city, I would like to thank all the protesters that came out across the country to this city and standing up in their cities as well, demanding change. We all have one thing in common. We want change for my brother's case. This right here is this 22-year sentence they gave this man. It's a slap on the wrist. We serving a life sentence and not having him in our life. And that hurts me to death. And looking at his daughter, beautiful daughter, Gianna, in her video, saying the first video, my dad changed the world. He did change the world. But at the end result, he gets a slap on the wrist. My nephew just said, 22 years from killing her dad, that she can't take her to the school. He can't eat lunch with her. He can't conversate with her. I know with my daughter, I love my daughter. Hugs her, we talk, that's my little best friend. And I hate to see that he cannot have that, she can't have that connection with her father. Those great conversations, those wonderful phone calls, lighting up her face, you know. And around the world, black, white, brown, we all need to come together, take our bus to the Senate, stand out there, and demand this George Floyd Act be passed, and also, as well as the act being passed. We need to stand there, put pressure on this Senate. Right. You know, and I was thinking last night, guys, honestly, we heard Obama say this plenty of times, get out and vote. We hear so many folks say get out and vote. Everybody got out and voted and marched in these streets, and we got change. We got our first black president. A lot of people came together like they did now, my brother's death, and we got this. But guess what, people? We need to take that same energy and bring that back to that Senate and demand them pass that bill. Amen. Because as we've seen Trump numerous times stand up, fussing on camera numerous times, countless times, because he did not have the power that we thought he had to get something done. He had to call on the Senate. And we need to get out there, understand that message. Go to the Senate, put pressure on the Senate, and get these bills and laws passed for all of us. Amen. Can stand on with this American flag as one. And we, as black people, need to know this American flag represents us, because we feel it don't.
All right. Thank you, Rodney. And as we bring his cousin, Sharita, please understand, this is only one step in getting accountability in the criminal level. The federal charges are still pending. So I do believe that when Philonise and Terrence and Rodney say the maximum, it is still attainable to get maximum accountability for George Floyd. 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 Now you will hear from his cousin, Sharita Tate.
Come on, Sharita.
Hello, everybody. I won't spend a whole lot of time sort of reiterating what my family has already said. I think they have spoke very eloquently about how we dealt with this last year and our thought processes as it relates to the amount of time that Derek Chauvin was given. Truth be told, I don't think any sentence would be enough, because what truly would be justice would be for us to be able to have George back. But with that being said, I'd just like to take this time to thank the countless number of people that have been supportive of us since the very beginning. I remember when we first came here and we were talking about the sentence and the trial and what potentially the outcome would be. And as we sat through the trial and watched the murder over and over again and came back with the 3 convictions, then we all waited for this day. I will have to say that we didn't get what we wanted. We definitely wanted to see the maximum penalty, but however, as they've already stated, we do have the federal ahead of us, and we are hoping that we can get some real accountability with him getting a life sentence. And lastly, I just want to speak on the Policing Act. You know, we've had it partially, it's before the Senate, and I would just say, echo what everyone else has said. We need this passed immediately. We need to really have some true accountability across the board. Thank you.
And finally, before we take a few of your questions, we have his cousin Tara Brown from Houston, Texas.
Well, I just want to say, my family has spoken a lot about everything that we've gone through since we started this journey. And I will tell you, it definitely has been a journey for us. And as a family, we decided that we were committed to 2 things for sure. We wanted to make sure that we got some measure of justice for George and for the countless other families who have lost loved ones in the way that we did. And the other thing is that we were committed to making sure that we force the change that we want to see and create this legacy that will live on forever. Just want to say thank you to everybody who has supported us throughout this journey, especially the protesters and the activists who have been nonstop and relentless, and they've helped us get to this point. And the other thing is, we want to say that this bill needs to get passed, and I want to make sure that we don't stop just with this bill, but it's important that you hold your state elected officials accountable to that as well. We are also looking at the local level where they're making change. Even in our city, where we're from in Houston, there has been some changes already. Our mayor, Sylvester Turner, has banned chokehold, and we have qualified immunity is on the table. So we are keeping active, and we want to make sure that you stay in the fight. Please keep fighting. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. And finally, our national leader, Reverend Al Sharpton.
We're going to open up the questions for the family and all of us. Let me say this so you're clear. If there is conviction in the federal trial and he is convicted and the other three, that federal time can run after the 22 and a half years.
Amen.
It does not have to run concurrent, which is why we're saying that we still want full justice. Secondly, when we talk about the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, we know the difference, Senate, between two slices of bread and a sandwich. A sandwich has meat between the two slices of bread. Don't come down with a compromise that is two slices of bread with no meat in the middle. Don't put George Floyd's name, a strong man, on a weak bill. Make sure that you talk to those in the family and those of us involved in the struggle before you make any compromise. The difference between a compromise and a sellout is in the eye of the appraiser.
Wow.
And we will be part of the appraiser. Questions?
For the family, I have a question with regard to the family, and I'd like to pose a question to one of the family members, whomever would like to answer it.
What's the question?
During this news conference in last June, Attorney General Ellison issued a clarion call to the arts and entertainment community to take the mantle in seeking justice. Any one of the family members can answer why that might be important to them or why it may not.
Why to get artists and entertainers involved. Philonis will attempt to answer your question, but we want to invite other families who are here who have lost loved ones due to police brutality to also come forward. Mr. Floyd, can you answer that question? Okay. All right. We may answer that question on the side for you. Okay.
Question about the case, sir.
Okay. Question about the case. And Attorney Stones, where are the other families?
Today in court, Derek Chauvin offered condolences to the family. I was wondering what you thought about that. And also Derek Chauvin's mother continued to say that her son was innocent and that people did not know her son like the family did. And I was wondering what you thought about those comments. The condolences from Derek Chauvin and the mother saying that her son was innocent and people did not know Derek Chauvin like her family did.
All right. I just thought about it as the same thing with my brother. People didn't know who my brother was. They labeled him. The trial was all about my brother instead of it should have been about Mr. Chauvin. So the things that she spoke about, I understand that because that's her son. Same way she spoke up for her son, I spoke up for my brother. So we all love our loved ones, but the fact that I will never see my brother again is worse because she still will have the opportunity to see her son in a cell anytime she wants to.
Let me say something about that with Philonis. When I heard his mother speak, and I respect any mother stand up for their son,
today, the justice that we saw was a partial justice, not full justice. And it's the United States of America that we see, a black America and a white America. Today, many white people feel comfortable with the sentence that came down. But we know that it's not comfortable for black people, especially many who are in prison today who are going to welcome Derek Chauvin for those 22 years. The reality is, the state that killed George Floyd has yet to pass a single piece of legislation to hold police accountable. Negotiations are happening right now, and they are watering down the bills that would hold police accountable. And the government, the United States, the federal government, has yet to pass the George Floyd Policing Act. Right. This is America. Let's wake up. Today is a day that we will remember that we did not get full justice. But justice inside the courthouse is not enough. We need justice outside the courthouse. And we are demanding for people who last summer marched and protested and came out. If you really care about justice, it is time for you to come back outside and march and protest until we get justice. We must do that for George Floyd's family, and we must do that for all the countless families across this country. And we must do it for the children and the people who are walking among our streets today, who will be next, because we have not done anything to protect the lives of individuals like Winston Smith, who was killed here not that long ago, that the federal government has covered up, to Dante Wright, and the countless names that we know. It is time for the state of Minnesota and Minnesotans to stand up, but it's time for Americans to get uncomfortable about injustice. If you can demand a vaccine in a pandemic, we need the vaccine of justice in this country. We need the vaccine of the justice in this country against the police that are killing us, against the economic justice that's happening in our neighborhoods. We demand justice, and we say every single day that we will demand justice by any means necessary. And I'd like to bring up Michelle Gross from Communities United Against Police Brutality.
All right, Michelle. Thank you. My name is Michelle Gross, MICHELLEGROSS, and I am one of the founders and currently the president of the organization Communities United Against Police Brutality. To say that we are disappointed in this sentence is an understatement. There were so many aggravating factors and virtually no mitigating factors. The judge should have sentenced Mr. Chauvin to the fullest extent of the law. He needed to send a message, and his message was lukewarm at best. As the sentence is a presumptive sentence, it even means that Derek Chauvin will only serve 2/3 of that sentence. It's simply not enough. But more than that, we have had in this state over 270 people killed at the hands of police in the state of Minnesota since the year 2000. Derek Chauvin is only one of 2 officers who was ever convicted and sentenced of anything. He's one of only 4 officers who has been prosecuted. In other words, we have a very, very, very long way to go to even pretend that we are going to give justice. We need to reopen all of the cases of wrongful deaths in this state at the hands of law enforcement. All of those cases need to be reopened, need to get a legitimate investigation, not a phony cover-up as the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and these other police agencies have often done. We need to have an independent investigation and an independent prosecution. And until we have those things, we have no justice for these stolen lives. But beyond that, we need to change the conditions that led to these deaths in the first place. We need to change those conditions. We can honestly say that in the state of Minnesota and in the city of Minneapolis, we have not had one meaningful change that has occurred since the death of George Floyd that would prevent it from happening again. That is simply unacceptable. It means that we will continue to go through this cycle, and families will continue to grieve, and our communities will continue to be traumatized over and over and over again because we refuse to address the underlying problem. This is unacceptable. We are not going to go along with it. We demand change, and we demand it now. Thank you.
Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Say his name. George Floyd. 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 Winston Smith. Say his name.
Winston Smith.
Say his name.
Winston Smith.
Say his name. All right, no doubt, no doubt. We're very disappointed by the verdict today. We believe that he should have. Oh, my name is Traren Cruz. I'm lead organizer with BLM Minnesota, TRAHERNCREWS. We're very disappointed in the verdict today. We feel that we know that Derek Chauvin should have been sentenced to 30 or 40 years. We know in the state of Minnesota, people have been sentenced to 30 or 40 years for nonviolent offenses like selling drugs and things like that. So if we can send people to jail for 30, 40, 50 years for selling drugs or for nonviolent offenses, then Derek Chauvin should go to jail for 30, 40, 50 years for torturing somebody for 10 minutes in front of children in Southside Minneapolis. Also, like some of the speakers said, for this to be the home of where George Floyd happened and no meaningful reform has taken place, like requiring police officers to carry personal professional liability insurance, and then qualified immunity, having a database of killer cops. These are some initiatives that could be put in place right now that could prevent another George Floyd from happening. And at the federal level, we don't have a anti-lynching bill yet. It needs to be passed. Since Emmett Till, we haven't had the George Floyd Act hasn't been passed. The Eric Garner Act hasn't been passed. So we urge Congress and the Senate and President Biden to make some meaningful legislation around police accountability and economic justice. Thank you.
We have someone that has met with our families for over a year and a half now, almost 2 years, hearing from our stories, hearing from our pain, hearing from everything that we have gone through with losing the people that we love. And he sat down and heard from us from over a period of time and wrote up legislation on behalf of our families that we are now fighting for. And we will call forward John McCollin.
Hello, my name is Jonathan McClellan. I'm president of the Minnesota Justice Coalition. We are part of a collective of organizations that work with the families and community to draft and advance legislation and other policy initiatives at the state capitol here in St. Paul and in Washington, D.C. I want to give my deepest condolences to the families who should not have to be here and whose lives have been changed forever. It has been 65 days since the Derek Chauvin, a former Minneapolis police officer, was found guilty of second and third degree murder and second degree manslaughter. Chauvin, who has never expressed remorse for George Floyd's death, even after the verdict was reached on April 20th, 2021. Derek Chauvin violated the public trust and showed a blatant disregard for human life. The results of his brutality have caused immense damage to our community, primarily of color. Further, this incident has sparked outrage around the world. We welcome the sentence of 22.5 years, but feel it did not reach far enough. Derek Chauvin should be serving life without the possibility of parole. We would have not had this verdict had the people not hit the streets demanding justice. If there wasn't the outpouring of grief from the world, if there wasn't a brave young girl who recorded the viral video of George Floyd's death, I ask myself, is this what it takes to get justice for a person of color? Is this really justice? Sure, we have a guilty verdict. Sure, we have a settlement. But will things actually change, not just for the present, but our future? This conviction is a drop in the bucket of what the criminal justice system owes our community. Sadly, this will be only the second time in modern Minnesota history that an officer has been sent to prison for murdering a human being on the job. Absent any substantive change in legislative policy, has anything really changed? How long before we're right back here fighting for the justice for another victim of police? We know their blueprint: murder, lies, stall, attack the reputation of the victim, cover up, and repeat. We are the state that has failed to correct the wrongs of the past and the wounds it has inflicted on communities of color through state-sanctioned violence. We must continue to carry this fight into the legislature and Congress. We must change and dismantle the systems that allow and have allowed the Derek Chauvins to thrive behind the coded slogan of protect and serve. We demand transparency, accountability, and justice for all stolen lives, even the ones not caught on camera. Our greatest failure is to do nothing knowing what we know. We must wrap our arms around these families. This conviction and sentencing has a special impact on these families who are still fighting for justice for their loved one and can only dream of a trial, let alone a sentencing of a killer. So while we fight for change in the legislature and in Congress with policy, we ask that you not forget what was revealed behind the veil. We ask that you not forget the pain of these families. We ask that you not forget our humanity. Thank you.
I'm Bishop Harding Smith, a friend of George Floyd. And, you know, history, when we look at history, history is recorded event of the past. His story. But have you heard our story? Listen! We as a people have been struggling for over 400 years. You hear our cries, but do you feel our pain? 50 years from now, this family will still be enduring the pain and suffering of losing a loved one. America, we are at a crossroads. We are here today to make a decision on where we go. We needed a strong verdict. This country, this nation has a long history with racism. We need to start looking deep within ourselves as a nation what direction we choose to go. Because we as a people will always keep fighting. We are not going to sit down or lay down. We're going to continue to fight for our rights. Today, I wish that we had a 40-year sentence. I wish that Chauvin was also charged with hate crimes. But that didn't happen. That did not happen, and we are really disappointed. But we also have a trial coming up in 2022 of Alexander Cain, of Tutal, of Lane. And we need to let our voices be heard. We need to be out here. I thank you all.
Whew. Minnesota, Mississippi.
What's your name?
That's coming. Good evening. My name is Deborah Watts, the co-founder of the Emmett Till Legacy Foundation and a cousin of Emmett Till. Our great-grandfathers were brothers. And so they have a half smile today because we're not quite done. Minnesota, Mississippi. Mississippi. Repeat after me. Mississippi. Mississippi. The past is not past until justice is served. Because as we stand here, we cannot ignore the past because 66 years ago, Emmett Till was murdered in Money, Mississippi. The murderers were acquitted, and there's one last living accomplice that has never been charged. Her name is Carolyn Bryant Donham. Carolyn Bryant Donham. Don't forget that. Emmett's case is in the hands of the Mississippi DA, Dwayne Richardson. Dwayne Richardson. Also, it is in the hands of the Federal Department of Justice as well. But I stand here today because I don't want these families to have the same 66-year journey that we have right now. So my sympathy, my condolences go out to the Floyd family and all of these families that are behind me. We need justice. If you want to talk about reconciliation, spell Justice. A-C-E to me and to all of us. Okay? So the past is not past until justice is served. I am not here for white guilt. I am not here for listening to kumbaya. I'm here to make a difference. And these families, through their pain and their passion and their purposes, are not activists. None of us are activists, but we are activated. Activated to move forward towards justice. So just remember, Emmett Till, if you don't hear the parallels or see the parallels, then there's some blindness happening. But some of the same things that happen in Mississippi, they just wear different uniforms, right? Different uniforms. So the same cultural biases and racism and white supremacy is just by another name, new narrative. So Emmett Till, justice still needs to be served. H.R. 55, which is the anti-lynching bill, H.F. 2586 is the Emmett Lewis Till Victims Recovery Program to give support to these families because they're beyond some of the statute of limitation for help and support. So I just say thank you for your attention. Thank you for these families being activated and speaking your truths. So the past is not past until justice is served. Thank you. Thank you.
We will now have the significant other of George Floyd, Courtney Ross, and also DJ with Twin Cities Coalition Justice for Jamal.
Yeah, Courtney, we got your back.
I hear my people out there. Hi, Jay. My name is Courtney Ross. I'm the fiance of George Floyd. On earth and in heaven, he will always be mine. He will always be the love of my life. I want to say one thing today. I want to speak to the people of Minneapolis. This is my home. I'm 612 for life. This is where I plan to be forever. I'm not calling for an evening of peace, but I am calling for an evening of non-violence. If you are using Floyd's name in any way to promote that, that is not what he was about. If you knew him, he was about peace, love, inclusiveness, and helping people. If he saw anything going on that caused violence or was hurting someone, he would take his 6 feet long arms out and try and stop them and then pray with them to make sure that they could go on with a better day and not act out in the devil's way. So again, I pray, Minneapolis, that we have a non-violent evening. You can still fight. Come with us. Come with DJ. Come with families supporting families against police violence. Come join us anytime. Get your screams out. Get your anger out in that way. And visit the Capitol. Get your anger out in that way too, people. I'm going to introduce a man that means so much to me, who has been boots on the ground since this happened, who has stood in Floyd's name and has made changes. And without him and all the people that you know I'm speaking to today, this verdict wouldn't even happen today. So thank y'all. DJ,
Nephew DJ.
Oh man. My name is DJ Hooker. I help organize with TCC for J. I'm going to say this is an unfortunate day. It's a day that shows that white tears still outweigh justice. It's a day where the government continues to reaffirm white supremacy. People can go to jail for selling drugs in the state where it's for 30 to 40 years. In other states where it's legal, and he got 22.5 years. We have not seen any change on the local level with the city council giving more money to these killer cops. We haven't seen any change at the state level with the Senate playing games all session and continuing to play games during this special session. And at the federal level, where instead of prioritizing stopping the genocide that's happening here in America to black and native bodies. They'd rather help fund another genocide around the world against the Palestinians. I have a question for y'all today. What does change look like? Does the La Eid, does that look like change?
Listen!
Does change look like Dante Wright? Does change look like Winston Smith?
Listen!
Is that what justice is about?
No.
I expect people to stay out in these streets and to stay activated, and we still got 3 more to go, and we still should turn this verdict over, and we should get more years. So,
That's my baby.
all power to the people.
We have a few more speakers, and then we will conclude this press conference. We will now call up Donnie Williams, the grandfather of Brian Quinones.
All right, Johnny.
Brian Quinones married my granddaughter, Ashley. And in September 7th of 2019, he was murdered by Richfield and Edina police. This is not a Minneapolis issue.
Listen!
Derek Chauvin was a Minneapolis cop. These other 3 guys are Minneapolis cops. This happens outside of Minneapolis. This happens in Richfield and Edina. This happens in Brooklyn Center and Brooklyn Park. It happens in Eagan. It happens in Bloomington. The Department of Justice is here to investigate the MPD. The MPD is under the sculpture of Hennepin County, which therefore should be investigated as well.
Yeah, that part.
Who files charges when you get in trouble, and who doesn't file charges against police? Mike Freeman, who's the Hennepin County District Attorney. I hope the DOJ does the right thing, but they need to take this scope and practices and patterns and whatever investigation they have and expand it outside of Minneapolis. Yes. Go to St. Paul, most dangerous police department in the state. Go to the BCA. Go to these people that cover this crap up and protect their brethren with laws on the books. We try to get things changed. Qualified immunity is a frickin' joke unless you're a cop. Gives you impunity, gives you what you can do because you know your back is covered. Nobody else has it. Brian Quinones was killed before George Floyd. I marched the streets for a year plus screaming George Floyd's name. 22 and a half years is a frickin' joke. We all agree, we know it. He deserved more. This kid deserves something. That kid deserves something. Kobe Heisler deserves something. And every time someone else gets killed, these kids move down a list. Bullshit. I'm sorry. All right? The list grows and gets new names added to it. I'm going to tell you, the new names are important, but this kid's more important. And I don't want anybody to ever forget this kid. Okay? I don't want anybody to forget Travis Jordan, or Kobe Heisler, or Philando Castile, or Jamar Clark. They're on the list. They're not fresh in your news or in your face, but they're just as important. And to some of us, they're more important. Thank you.
We will now have the friend of Travis Jordan. Paul.
Hi, I'm Paul Johnson, friend of Travis Jordan, who was also my roommate and living with me